Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and good evening. Especially for people in Europe and America. So I appreciate your effort to be available for this webinar, and I hope you all are in good health and safe. So my name is Nela Henrieti. I'm the task manager for this Unlocking Private Investment in Sustainable Infrastructure in Asia. Lesson from Central Asia. So I'm from task manager from ADBI side. So from Karek side, that's Ayub, as you know. So before we start our webinar, I would like to explain about the housekeeping rules. So Derek, could you share the PPT for that? So first, for the speakers and panelists, please mute your microphone where you're not presenting. So the button, as you see, the buttons for the microphone and video are on the left button of your screen. So like here on the red box. And then if you have a question related to the topic of our discussion, please type your question in Q&A. The moderator will remind you again in the session. So there is in the bottom on the screen. So if you want to chat with the host or other participant about the network or anything beside the topic, please use chat box. So when it's your turn to present, you can choose that you are the one that controls the screen, or you can ask us to do that. So Derek and Miss Suzu, our team on the back, will help you with that. So if you the one that controls the screen, you can show your presentation by click the share button. I think next slide, Derek. Share button located at the bottom of your meeting window. And then please select the file from your computer and open. For PPT, please choose the slideshow mode. And don't forget to click the share button located on the right side at the bottom. And then you will see the share screen menu on the top of your screen. If you choose annotate, you can choose some tools such as Spotlight as pointers. So at the end, don't forget to stop share after your presentation. So now for attendees and participants, so no video or audio. Please type your question related to the topic and topic in Q&A. So the team will monitor Q&A box all the time. So your question can be followed up in any time. So use chat to leave a message to the host or private chat to someone else. So for the participant, because you cannot like just talk, so please your hands if you want to respond or ask question in the Q&A session. So there's a box of participant and there's a menu for raise hand. So finally, as we inform you that we provide simultaneous interpretation for English and Russian language, in the bottom, you see the globe, and you click the globe, there is an option for Russian or English. So the PPT we provide on the screen is using English language, but we already have a Russian version for the PPT that's available in ADBI website, or my colleague maybe already sent you. So I think that's for introduction for the guidelines or for the technical guidelines. So with that, we will start our webinar for the welcoming session. So I will introduce Dr. Iskandar Abdullayev. He is a Deputy Director in Karek Institute. He is a member of International Water Resources Association. Prior joining Karek Institute, he was Regional Advisor at GIZ and Senior Researcher at ZEF, Center for Development Research, University of Bonn, Germany. So I think without further ado, Dr. Iskandar will introduce our speakers in welcoming session. So without further ado, Dr. Iskandar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nella. Welcome, nice meeting you, colleagues. Welcome to the Unlocking Private Investment for Sustainable Infrastructure in Karek region, Lessons from Central Asia workshop. According to ADB's calculations in a special report, Sustainable Infrastructure in 2017, Asia will need $26 trillion from 2016 until 2030, all around $2 trillion per year in the region to maintain its growth momentum, eradicate poverty, respond to the climate change. Public financing is both in short supply and high demand. Therefore, it is crucially important to attract private financing for sustainable infrastructure investment. Despite of its importance, however, the long-term nature of and risks associated with infrastructure investment, making a private sector to invest is very difficult. Another reason behind the low willingness of the private sector to invest in infrastructure because of low return. Keeping in this mind these issues, Carrick Institute and ADBI initiated a call for papers for unlocking private investment in sustainable infrastructure in Asia in November 2019. In March 2020, due to outbreak of the coronavirus, ADBI and CI conducted teleconference to discuss only 3 papers submitted to this call. Today, we will start 4-day webinar to have 14 presentations, papers, 3 keynote speakers, and interactions with country representatives. Today, it's my pleasure at the opening session to have 3 distinguished colleagues. Now, I will invite them to give their opening statements. First, Ms. Laziza Sabirova. She is a principal regional economist in Central and West Asia Department of Asian Development Bank. After obtaining her PG degree in economics from Indiana University, she joined ADB in 2000 and worked for infrastructure projects in People's Republic of China and countries in Central Asia and South Caucasus. She also led the preparation of ADB country partnership strategies for several countries. Laziza, floor is yours.
I hope I unmuted myself. Thank you very much, Iskandar. Dear participants, distinguished guests, very nice to see you, to be part of this event. And I was told that about 100 of participants registered overall. I think it's a very important topic. And I think it is also very important in the context of this whole idea, build back better for the post-COVID world. Of course, this idea is being discussed now a lot, but various think tanks, governments, organizations, and this idea of sustainable investments and unlocking private investments for sustainable infrastructure, it's very important and very timely. And I would like to thank ADBI and Carrick Institute for organizing this event. Of course, for ADB, you all know this is a very important topic. A lot of our lending is in infrastructure. A lot of lending, of course, goes to transport, energy, water infrastructure, urban water supply and sanitation, and any other urban infrastructure. And that is also the case for our Carrick region. So I hope that this event, these discussions, Dr. Iskandar just said now, there will be several, like 14 presentations, 3 key speakers and discussions. So I hope there will be some key takeaways prepared for this event, and that this could be shared post-event. I think it will be very useful for most of my ADB colleagues working in this region and working on infrastructure projects to really see and hear what this distinguished group of analysts, intellectuals, practitioners had to say, something new, something original perhaps on this type of topics. And I think this event also is following a very interesting discussion organized by ADBI with Professor Francis Fukuyama on sustainable infrastructure and development. And I think these events kind of overlap in a way and interlinked. So it's very nice to see this whole thing being now debated and discussed actively by both ADBI and Carrick Institute. So the only one thing, and of course the agenda looks very, very comprehensive, and it's a 3-day event. I'm pretty sure there would be a lot of interesting presentations and discussions. One thing I would really urge the participants to look at also at the issue of importance of governance for unlocking private investments. And of course, we all know the importance of rule of law, transparency, competition policy, the role of the state. There is an evolving role of the state. So what is it that there would be the optimal sort of functions that state should undertake, and what are the functions that they should get away with, perhaps, or to do it differently. So this rule of law and governance gave birth to this new, well, relatively speaking, new term, I think first used by EBRD in their report on governance, a governance intensive investments. And I really like this idea and this term. And I think this is very relevant for our CAREC region. Of course, it is relevant for many other Asian and Pacific countries, but of course, you all understand and appreciate that in CAREC region, this governance intensive investments is very important. Three-day event with lots of relevant discussions and presentations, and I really like a format. I appreciate the organizers of this event, that it's a mixture of countries, representatives of practitioners in these areas, but also academics and analytical thought. And so it's a mixture of sort of private and public sector and so on. And I know the event is spread out in different days. Also, it's a mixture of different regions. So I'm pretty sure it will be an eventful and interesting event. So with that, I would like to thank the organizers, the participants, and I wish from behalf of Asian Development Bank a very fruitful and very good event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laziza. Your points are well taken. Indeed, ADB's role is in investment in the region, in Asia, in Central Asia is huge. And I'm sure this workshop will also contribute to enhancing further cooperation between multilateral funding institutions, the private companies, and we can, as you said, by improving governance system, we could really attract also private business, private investments into different needs in the region. Thank you, Laziza. Next opening statement will be done by Dr. Titushi Snobe, who is the Dean of and CEO of Asian Development Bank Institute. Dr. Snobe holds PhD in economics and has over 2 decades of experience in analyzing the role of human capital, institutions, and management in industrial development in Asia and other regions of the world. Dr. Snobe, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Iskandar, for kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of ADBI, I welcome you to the CAREC Institute and ADBI's virtual policy workshop. I would like to thank sincerely our co-organizer, Mr. Saeed Shakir Shah, and his team from the CAREC Institute, a great partner of ADBI, for working together again to make this event possible, despite the several difficulties we faced. We had to give up the physical event in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, that we had planned to have in the last March. I hope that we can muster our energy again to reconvene a physical event next spring. I would also like to thank Dr. Laziza Sabirova, a principal regional economist, the Central and West Asia Department, ADB, for her very nice introduction and her continued support. This workshop is based on the collection of those manuscripts that have been reviewed and selected by the Board of Editors. The manuscript will be constitute an edited book. The book will have the same title as this workshop, that is Unlocking Private Investment in Sustainable Infrastructure in Asia, Lessons from Central Asia. I'd like to congratulate on the completion of the book manuscripts and express my gratitude to the contributors who will be presenting their studies in this workshop. Some of them are participating from the US and Europe, including my friend, Nicola Bush, who have to stay up late night or wake up early in the morning to join us. I'd like to thank them for their devotion. I would also thank editors of the book, namely Mr. Charles Kim, Dr. Iskandar Abdul Raif, Professor Bajan Grewe, and Professor Yoshino for their hard work. The book publication project is now in its final stage of submitting the full manuscript to the publisher. I hope all authors will receive useful feedbacks from this workshop and provide high-quality knowledge input to our stakeholders. We have the privilege of having keynote addresses by distinguished speakers. Professor Ramin Jahanbegloo, Global Intellectual and the Director of Mahatma Gandhi Center for Peace and Nonviolence, and Vice Dean of the School of Law at Jindal Global University, and also Mr. Rajiv Mahajan, Project Finance Manager, Private Sector Facility, Green Climate Fund. I would welcome all the government officials participating in this workshop from Central Asia and everyone else joining us from around the world. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I hope that this workshop will be rewarding and deepening your understanding of innovative ways of unlocking investments in sustainable infrastructure. I look forward to fruitful discussions over the 4 days and also your responses to my keynote address, which is scheduled for tomorrow, 2 p.m. in the Japan Standard Time. Let me stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Snobby. Indeed, I would like to use this occasion and thank you and your team. Great job. I think team between ADBI and CI have done excellent job. And we, while preparing the papers, we also learned a lot. And one more thing is, as you said, and also Aziza mentioned, that participants include not only researchers who have conducted research, but also practitioners and policymakers from CARIC region, Central Asia and Asia. This makes our platform very interesting and lively and also learning. We also not only giving our presentations, but are getting a lot of feedback from our stakeholders for whom this research should be addressed. Thank you once more, Dr. Snobby. Next opening statement will be done by Mr. Saeed Shakil Shah, Director of CARIC Institute. Mr. Shah has 2 master degrees, one on international trade law and economics, second on international relations. Before joining CARIC Institute, Mr. Shah was the Chief Reforms, Automation and Preferential Trade, Pakistan Customs, Federal Board of Revenue, Government of Pakistan. He also served as a Joint Secretary, Economic Affairs, Prime Minister's Office, Government of Pakistan. Floor is yours, Mr. Shah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iskandar. Can you hear me well? Hello.
Yes.
All right.
Yes,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Respected panelists, participants, and dear colleagues. Yet again, it's my privilege to give opening remarks for another important capacity building event along with my honorable colleagues from ADB, Ms. Laziza and Dean Sonobi from ADBI, with whom we have been working to design and deliver needed knowledge support to our member countries and all stakeholders. As we all know, infrastructure is the set of fundamental facilities and systems serving a country, city, or other areas, including the services and facilities necessary for its economy to function. It includes transportation, energy, water, and building infrastructures. And we all know sustainable infrastructure refers to the designing, building, and operating of these structural elements in ways that do not diminish the social, economic, and ecological processes required to maintain human equity, diversity, and the functionality of the natural systems. The learned speakers before me already touched upon the importance of investment in infrastructure, and more so in sustainable infrastructure. I would like to re-emphasize the points made by my colleagues in making our collective message better received among the stakeholders. Indeed, our region is in increasing need for sustainable public infrastructure that lays the foundations for a sustainable development and regional connectivity. Literature describes sustainable development beside other aspects as a triple bottom line of environmental conservation, economic prosperity, and social equity. Through such infrastructure, we thrive and are able to mitigate the impacts of climate change while pursuing and providing socioeconomic and sustainable development opportunities to our communities and improve our people's quality of life and freeing them from economic depravity. Therefore, sustainable development has been the strategic focus of the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program 2030. Under this strategic outlook, the CAREC Institute has been leveraging efforts with all implementation partners to support the member countries in sustainable infrastructure development in various sectors. According to International Institute for Sustainable Development, there are certain elements of sustainable infrastructure like lower carbon and environmental footprints, protect natural systems, prove resilience to the changing climates, optimize the use of natural ecosystems and their infrastructure services, move beyond compliance on core labor standards and human rights, and others. So this is a very complex set of indicators for the policymakers to keep in mind while coming up with policies to attract private sector investment in the sustainable infrastructure. The agenda of sustainability is gathering support. There is growing discourse on green recovery after COVID, and World Economic Forum has set the theme of the Great Reset, which mentions the management of global commons. Themes of sustainable infrastructure will find growing echo amongst the policymakers in the times to come. CAREC Institute has mainstreamed sustainable infrastructure in its research program. In one of our earlier projects on climate change in CAREC region, water scarcity and food security were highlighted as areas of concern for our region, which is experiencing higher rate of temperature rise compared to other regions. This has detrimental impact on water, which is a fundamental resource for human subsistence and well-being. To address scarcity of water, judicious and far-sighted governance and management of water resources is needed to ensure food security and sustainable economic growth. Any water management effort requires appropriate and sustainable infrastructure that entails large amount of investment that only governments cannot provide, and hence the need for leveraging private investment in this field. Therefore, as Dr. Iskandar highlighted earlier, we along with ADBI initiated a call for paper inviting renowned global scholars of the field to conduct empirical research based on which, and in consultation with member country experts, explore a collective way forward on this very, very critical front. Now we have the privilege of having our scholars and country experts here with us and presenting their research findings, and more importantly, recommending innovative ways or schemes for unlocking private investment for sustainable infrastructure through expert discussions with country representatives giving country perspectives as well. And obviously, the subject of these discussions will not only be water, but also the other components of infrastructure, which is transportation, buildings, and energy as well. So with that, I stop here. I think we have a very, very good galaxy of experts and scholars. And the next 4 days and many sessions, I think most of the participants will learn a lot on this very, very important subject. So thank you very much, and over to you, Dr. Iskandar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shah. Indeed, as you have highlighted, that infrastructure investment should be sustainable, and sustainable infrastructure makes development much more long-term and also productive. and your institute under your leadership is coming into this area with support with ADBI and ADB. I congratulate with the start of this joint workshop. I would like to thank Ms. Laziza Sabirova, Dean Titush Snobi, Mr. Said Shakil Shah for their opening statements. Colleagues, we can start our workshop. I'm sure all key speakers and also presenters are ready. I will hand back to Nella, to you, to continue and start our workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Iskandar, and all the distinguished speakers in the welcoming remarks. So now we are in the photo session, and for the speakers and moderator, please switch the video on, and Derek will take a picture of all of us. So please switch on your video. Derek, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, give the instruction.
Okay,
Derek?
everyone please turn on your camera.
Yeah.
I think we're still waiting for some to turn their camera on.
Yes, I think there's many people, so you should take like two pages, like go to the next page after this.
Okay, ready? Oh, someone's still turning. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'll take one more. Oh, still joining. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, now thank you everyone. Now we're going to the session keynote address. From here, my colleague from Karek Institute will chair the session. Please allow me to introduce him. He's Mr. Isakan Ayub Ayubi. He's a former Fulbright Scholar and Bridge Fellow at Stanford and Georgetown University, respectively. So with a combined BA degree in Economics and International Relations, an LLM, and currently a DB in Government and Public Policy, Mr. Ayubi brings nearly 2 decades of experience in capacity building with stints in civil society, private sector, and government. So prior joining to the Karek Institute, he was the Regional Cooperation Advisor to the government of Afghanistan, with the core responsibility of providing advice and strategic issue of regional cooperation for Afghanistan and its foreign relation with immediate and far neighbors based on set of confident and building measures. So I think without further ado, I will give the floor to Ayub. Ayub, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nila, for the glamorous introduction. Thank you very much. And this comes to the moment before I introduce our distinguished keynote presenter. I would like to remind all colleagues, I think Dr. Nila forgot that your recording will be uploaded on our e-learning platform. We want to have your consent, both ADBI's e-learning platform and our Karek Institute's e-learning platform for educational and capacity building purposes. So we would like to have your consent, and this is spelled out to you. So with that, I would like to introduce, and I have the honor and privilege of introducing Professor Ramin Jahanbegloo. He's a global intellectual and presently the executive director of Mahatma Gandhi Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies and the vice dean of School of Law at Jandal Global University. He holds PhD in philosophy from Sorbonne University, France. His academic work encompasses research and teaching at Harvard, Toronto, Tehran, York, and other global universities in different parts of the world. He's the winner of the Peace Prize from the United Nations Association in Spain for his extensive academic works in promoting dialogue between cultures and his advocacy for nonviolence. Professor Jahanbegloo is the author of more than 30 books and numerous articles and book chapters featuring in prestigious academic publications. We are privileged and honored to have a global intellectual of his stature to give a keynote presentation in our workshop. His input will help us to link, in quote, what's often described as dry economic theories with concepts such as social capital, civic participation and cooperation, civic trust, and so on, to help our authors to shape their chapters and our country representatives to harmonize their policies in holistic manners. to unlock various kinds of investment in sustainable infrastructure. The floor is yours, Professor John Bigulu, and thank you for your time and commitment to be here with us, given the time difference. You're speaking from Toronto. Thank you very much, Professor John Bigulu. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isa Khan Ayubi. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's 1:30 in Toronto right now, where I'm speaking to you. And it's a great honor to be among you. And thank you very much to ADBI and all the organizers for this invitation. Now, my talk is going to be on sustainable infrastructural development and citizen trust. And I believe that, and eventually, IUB will help you with the PowerPoint if you need to see the PowerPoint. All social, political, and economic institutions are based on trust. That is to say, on a mechanism that creates and sustains solidarity between the society, state, and the economy. As such, though trust remains the property of individuals, it operates undoubtedly in the direction of the public good, including sustainable infrastructure development. The most important determinant of society-state market cooperation is trust in political institutions. It is correctly believed that when the level of social capital and political trust is high, citizen-state economy, public-private negotiations are more likely to succeed. There will be constructive engagement among all three spheres. Actors of different spheres will be incentivized and to participate in socioeconomic and political processes to achieve their collective common ends. Trust-based engagements enhances partnerships, cooperation, and overall governance of a society. In his seminal work on governance, Putnam claims that social capital is the key to making democracy work. He defines social capital as features of social organization, such as trust, norms, and networks that can improve the efficiency of society by facilitating coordinated actions. Putnam analyzes cooperation as the ultimate end of social capital. Different factors appear to give rise to social capital. Among these, the most important, I think, is trust in institutions beyond interpersonal relations. As a matter of fact, trust is in social and political institutions is considered critical for the viability of good governance. Analysts measure political trust by an index that incorporates the degree of trust citizens of a country have in the primary institutions of the state, including the National Assembly, police force, courts of law, political parties, as well as economic and investment mechanisms. The level of credibility and legitimacy of these institutions depend on the level of engagement of citizens in relation to their functionalities. Trust is therefore considered critical for a citizen-state relationship as a trend towards good governance, as a backbone between a nation and its government. Let us not forget that without the element of trust, citizens of a country will not understand and approve the fact that the money they are paying in the form of tax is really allocated for public expenditures. And more importantly, the money they are investing is efficiently allocated for infrastructure development. This is no secret that in many developing countries, there is a tension between infrastructure development and landholder interests. Most of these tensions are related to the absence of trust between governments and households who are reluctant to sell their inherited land for modernization and development purposes. And some governments around the world, especially in Asia, that undermine the dialogical process by imposing forcible land grab and deriving to a displacement of the farmers and peasants. However, in the case of a sustainable development project, which is based on a relation of trust between landowners and the government, prospects for a win-win social dialogue seem more feasible. In a recent study of 2018 done by Yoshino, Paul, and Sarma and Lakia for ADBI entitled Land Acquisition and Infrastructure Development Through Land Trust Laws, a Policy Framework for Asia, it is clearly pointed out that land trust policies could offer sustainable solutions to the tensions caused between economic growth prospects and the benefits of the landowners. According to the authors of this study, it takes about 4 years to acquire land through various negotiations, followed by a construction period of 5 years, after which landowners start enjoying the spillover benefit from an increase in tax collection. It goes without saying that the element of trust is crucial in such a process that provides regularity of land rent. Once the element of trust is inscribed in the model, the landowners would accept to invest their lands for an infrastructure project. However, the process of trust between the citizen and the government would not take place automatically without uplifting levels of social capital. It is thus imperative that we understand the relation between trust and civic education. I would like to highlight the role of civic education in enhancing the financial law knowledge of civil society for their active and enlightened involvement in trust investments in the infrastructure projects. First and foremost, we need to understand the concept of civic education, and by civic education, we understand an adult learning for social, political, economic engagements and responsibilities in betterment of a community. So consequently, educating citizens is an act of uplifting their consciousness concerning national interests and good governance. Rising levels of civic consciousness would help the citizens to uplift their level of trust in the social and political capacities of the community in order to perform the tasks necessary for organizational and developmental involvements. It also refers to the critical ability to interpret the social and political information beyond all levels of mistrust. As such, civic education results in an increase in citizen participation in the process of industrialization and development through an expressive political engagement and institutional trust. The link between civic education and organizational and industrial engagement has been well known for so long, but it has been abandoned by those governments and political leaderships which have no faith in the power of trust in good governance. Whether one considers citizen engagement in community-based efforts for economic change or interest in discussing the issue of civic trust in development and infrastructure projects, there is still a lot of progress to be made as regards the role of civic trust in infrastructural investments. In response to this shortcoming, we need to focus more often on norms and networks that could facilitate coordination and cooperation between the state and citizens and economy for mutual benefit. Unlike any other form of learning, civic education is embedded in the structure of relations between private and public interests. It exists neither within a given individual nor solely part of the structure of a state. And it's a mode of thinking and behavior that helps citizens of a nation and members of a community to trust that a state will meet their obligations and expectations. Evidence in democratic communities where there is higher level of social trust, varied levels of civic consciousness show that one could expect more engaged citizen participation in community development and governmental projects. Last but not least, focus on the civic capacities and economic dispositions of the citizens of an Asian state in developing infrastructure projects should not obscure the important commitment of a state to social justice. Civic education includes a wide range of strategies that are based on the healthy functioning of citizen trust in the framework of social justice. Only commitment to justice-oriented citizenship can promote different practices of social trust in unlocking private investments in sustainable infrastructure development. To undertake sustainable infrastructure development, including unlocking various schemes of investment, governments need citizens' trust and partnership. Host Carl underlined in the chapter on transition pathways for Central Asian energy infrastructure that markets for Central Asian energy exports should shift to public-private investment partnerships. According to the office, the primary objective here is to improve visibility of public and private stakeholders. If we consider the concept of trust as meaningful manner of multilateral decision-making, then we can say that infrastructure development is not one-dimensional economic agency and investment planning. Chao, Ruoshi, and Kemas emphasizing their contribution, which is called infrastructure investment and managerial oversight, a pathway to regional growth, that in the process of infrastructure investment, a common question is whether the government spending on infrastructure investment can generate long-term anticipated outcomes and strengthen national competitiveness. Balancing the choice of the private sector and that of the government is a crucial factor in infrastructure development in many Asian countries today. The chapter by Lee and Yu Kim, entitled The Role of Government in Attracting Private Investments in Suitable Infrastructure, the case of foreign direct investment inflows in Central Asia, points out clearly that countries in Central Asia should overcome their financial constraints in order to seek financing from foreign investors and be able to find a solution to the public-private partnership. As such, according to the office, foreign direct investment, FDI, could be an essential methodology for building long-term capabilities and diversification. However, as it's suggested by Juswanto and Abi Yunus in the chapters entitled Attracting Private Sectors in Infrastructure Investment, some Asian countries like Indonesia still need to balance their infrastructure sources of funding by attracting private sector investment. Consequently, what the office recommends to the Indonesian government is to provide tax incentives to the private sector and to add more infrastructure sectors in the list of pioneer sectors. As it was mentioned previously, private sector involvement in infrastructure development cannot become a sweet reality without any emphasis on the element of trust as a socio-psychological catalyst in the betterment of the economic process. And here, I think that the conclusion which is reached by Prabush and Tarizadeh and Pradhan in the chapter is quite interesting, because one of the finest findings of these three researchers concerning the lack of trust in the making of Central Asian economies is that the lowest growing economies, such as in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, receive less private participation in infrastructure and depend upon official development assistance. This is a sad reality, which is also attested by the research of our two Uzbek economists, Abidayjayev and Davletov, and through an acute study they've done of Uzbek economy and the impact of the railway line, the conclusion that arises is that in their findings is that the infrastructure development is important for the financial performance of enterprises and institutions. This modus operandi, which operates and concentrates on the private sector financing for infrastructure development, is also the major theme in the chapter of Muhammad Ayub Mer on impacts of patterns of financing on logistic infrastructures in CAREC member countries. Ayub Mer affirms that there are numerous examples in economic literature to demonstrate the development of various kinds of infrastructure improves the living standards of peoples and create employment opportunities. As such, we should not forget that the strong, significant, and robust impact of the share of short-term borrowing in total external debt on income and infrastructure development indicates the pressure on policymakers and economic managers. A global change in the lending and investment policies of industrial countries and lending institutions is required. Interestingly, an investigation by Verma and Mehta affirms this mode of thinking in the designated chapter, since according to the Office for Developing Sustainable Infrastructure in Land Pooling, private agencies are as important as central government and state governments. And it should be pointed out that the public-private partnership, the PPP, is a methodology supported and implemented by many of the researchers in their working papers. Among these, I just named David and Kosovic, who present in an interesting point of view in the chapter on PPPs in ASEAN and CAREC. And according to these authors, there has been a rapid shift to renewable energy in several ASEAN member states. And yet, with limited public funds to finance infrastructure investments, especially in electricity generation, CAREC countries and many AMS have also attracted a lot of interest and innovative investment in green projects, primarily through public-private partnerships. So this innovative mode of approach towards policymaking in Asian countries suggests that local public financing can play an important role in infrastructure development. In the chapter on China free models of local public financing for infrastructure investment, Liu discusses and compares three contrasting models of local public financing for infrastructure investments in China, ranging from the most radical to the mainstream. And the author also recognizes an emerging consensus in theoretical and policy analysis of development, recognizes that investment in physical infrastructures like roads and railways and waterway management, these are all important to, and they can play a critical catalyst role in promoting economic development. So to conclude, I go back to what I said in the beginning of my talk. I think that the element of trust is very important in the PPP. And I think that a trust can be best described as a private-public dialogical collaboration. And as such, the concept of trust protects the interests and rights of both private economic agents and that of a government or a public entity. A public-private partnership is established for benefiting the society and the state. Strong and sustainable collaborations are built through public-private partnerships. And if trust is a social capital, as it was said by Putnam, which enlarges confidence in public institutions, then we can say that all governments and their private partners need to evaluate how their actions can be used proactively to facilitate higher levels of social capital within their societies. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor John Bigulu. Indeed, very in-depth philosophical understanding of different spheres of a country and also trust. And thank you very much. And we would like to thank you one more time, given your time difference that you stayed with us and the commitment. Thank you so much. With that, Dr. Nila, the floor is back to you.
Thank you, Ayub, and thank you, Professor John Bigulu. You have a very inspiring keynote remarks. So I take note some important point from your speech today. So now we will go to the main of our event. So as you know, we have like 4 days discussion that's to provide the opportunity for speakers to receive feedback for their papers. As mentioned by Mr. Sakil Shah in the opening, that we did call for papers since last year, and we have received like 15 manuscripts so far, and now we are in the negotiation with Springer for publication. So perhaps we can launch the book around March or May next year. So if the situation is getting better, maybe we can do that physical event in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. So without further ado, I will introduce our co-editor for this book, Professor Bajan Grewal. He will explain to all of us the structure and summary of the book. So Bajan Grewal is a professorial fellow in the Center for Strategic Economic Studies at Victoria University, Melbourne, Australia, where he is also director of the Governance and Regional Economics Program. He was team leader of an ADB-funded project on China's fiscal management reforms undertaken at Ministry of Finance in Beijing. So before joining Victoria University, Bajan served as a director of Revenue Policy and Intergovernmental Fiscal Relation in Victoria Department of Treasury and Finance. So I think now I'll give the floor to Professor Grewal. Yeah. Please.
Professor Grewal, you're muted. Let us try to unmute you. If you cannot unmute yourself.
Okay, please. Yeah, if you can help me.
Okay,
I've
now
had
you're okay.
problems with my laptop today.
Now you're good.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and my sincere apologies for this technical problem, which prevents me from seeing your faces on my laptop, but I will persist and continue with my presentation for the next 10 minutes. I've been privileged to actually been invited to be one of the editors of this book, which is, in my opinion, a very timely and very useful enterprise. And I think it's timely in the sense that, particularly in the region of Central Asia, the public-private partnerships are now starting to get underway in different parts of the infrastructure, not just water infrastructure, but also the transport infrastructure and so forth. So this book will serve a very good purpose in terms of educating the public servants, also politicians, hopefully, and create an atmosphere, in other words, which will be conducive to the promotion of public-private partnerships and also the modernization of infrastructure. The book has got 15 chapters, and I will just quickly read through the titles of those chapters for you. Chapter 1 is infrastructure investment and managerial oversight, and that is followed by another chapter which is transition pathways for Central Asian energy infrastructure. The third chapter is on Silk Road smart cities, sustainability drivers for Central Asia. Then that's followed by a chapter on infrastructure needs and investment schemes in CARE countries. Then there is a chapter on financing infrastructure in Central Asia, the water sector. Another chapter is on does infrastructure investment lead to economic growth? Evidence from Central Asian countries. And then there is a chapter on China, 3 models of local public financing for infrastructure investment. That's followed by another chapter on impacts of the patterns of financing on logistic infrastructure in CARE member countries. After that, there is a discussion about increasing infrastructure investment with spillover tax revenues. This is a very novel idea, which is that if the infrastructure improves the economic capabilities of a region, then there are also spillover effects, which means that other people than those which are directly affected by that infrastructure, other people also benefit. So the rest of the economy benefits from the spillovers. So there is a proposal that perhaps the government should start to mobilize these resources through taxing the spillovers, which means that you're taxing people who are not directly affected but indirectly affected by the infrastructure investment. And then there is a chapter 10 on the role of government in attracting private investment in suitable infrastructure, the case of FDI, foreign direct investment inflows in Central Asia. Chapter 11 deals with government initiatives to unlock private participation in infrastructure, lessons from Indonesia's PPP in the water sector. And then there is a chapter which is evidence-based infrastructure financing, the case of Uzbekistan. That is followed by a chapter on PPPs, public-private partnerships, in ASEAN and CARIB countries, the scope for PPPs in renewable energy projects. That is followed by a chapter on land pooling, a PPP model for sustainable infrastructure investment in Delhi. That's the capital of India. And then there is the last chapter, which is attracting private sector investments in infrastructure, the role of tax incentives in Indonesia infrastructure. So these are the 15 chapters which are part of this book. And as I said before, they are written very well. They are written by experts who have had personal experience, and literature from other parts of the world is reviewed in these chapters as well. So all in all, I think this is a very good collection of original papers which will serve extremely well if they are widely distributed after the book is published. My conviction is that PPPs are still, relatively speaking, new in the bureaucracies of Central Asian countries. And I think the distribution of literature such as this book will help in spreading the message and persuading the people to participate, and also not only participate but also in terms of the implementation of the PPPs. I think it will create a very friendly and useful atmosphere. The key messages of the book are, number one, because infrastructure promotes connectivity, it increases productivity of land, labor, and capital. Secondly, by making factors of production more productive, investments in infrastructure make regions and nations not only more connected with one another, but also more productive and more prosperous through trade and innovation. The next point is that historically, infrastructure was always a public sector responsibility. Now this is where there's a sea change coming in the Asian part as well, but also in the rest of the world, because the PPPs are becoming popular as the public sectors are finding that they don't have enough resources to invest in infrastructure. The tax bases are not large enough to support infrastructure expenditures that are needed, but also the tax effectiveness is relatively poor in many parts of the Asian subcontinent. Now, investment in infrastructure is also needed for transitioning to low carbon energy, not just the typical traditional infrastructure financing, roads and bridges, but also to transition to low carbon energy from solar, wind, and hydro. So addressing these new policy challenges is also necessary, and investment in these is very essential. The last message is that good governance and effective managerial oversight are essential for all energy scenarios to maximize benefits of infrastructure. So I think these are the key messages of this book, which, as I was saying before, will be extremely useful in spreading the message of infrastructure modernization, how to do it, and how to raise the resources, and how to tap private sector resources for modernization of infrastructure. So I think with that, I'll close my presentation with the hope that the message of this book, our messages are widely shared, and they serve the purpose for which they are brought to you through this book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Grewal. I think we did run out of time because I think a bit late in the opening. So I think we go directly to our session one. The moderator for the session one, that will be Mr. Chojo Kim. So he was a secretary of the country president for economic and financial affairs before joining ADBI. He was my boss. He's my boss, deputy dean of IDBI. So he has extensive experience in international development, and he holds BA in economics from Seoul National University and MS Finance from Georgia State University. I think without further ado, Didi Kim, I'll give the floor to you. And sorry for the delay.
Okay, thank you very much, Nella, for kind introduction. So we heard very interesting and very enlightening the opening remarks and also the keynote speech. Based on those speech, we will look for the ideas where the infrastructure can be implemented properly. So it is my great privilege to chair this first session with very renowned speakers. Before going into the session, as one of the editors for this book project, I sincerely thank all the authors who have shared their insights and expertise on this important topic. I also thank government officials who participated in this workshop. We really look forward to your feedback, which will enrich our discussion and improve the book chapters. This session is meant to discuss the assessing impacts of infrastructure investment and the future of sustainable infrastructure. As we heard that the importance of the good governance and the managerial oversight for the infrastructure in general, especially energy infrastructure in particular. So in this sense, this discussion is very important, discussion will set the tone for the discussion to be followed. This session, we have two papers to present and discuss. After hearing from author's presentation, designated discussant will provide feedback, and after that, I will open the floor for the questions and feedback. Please write your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom screen. Then I will direct the received questions to the speakers. Or if you want to speak directly, you can click raise your hand button in Zoom screen, and I will give you a chance to speak. Without further ado, let's go into the session discussion. The first presenter is Professor Eugene Chow. Professor Eugene Chow is the faculty of research associate at the Wharton School Alternative Investment Initiative under the finance department. He co-launched the first private equity infrastructure investment course to the Wharton, the MBAs, and he joined the program at the administration. So his professional and research interests include private equity infrastructure investment, operating efficiency, PPP, and investment policies and incentives. Professor Chow, floor is yours. You have around 10 minutes for presentation. Please, Professor Chow. Professor Chow, can you hear us? Professor Chow.
His mic is muted.
Yes, can you guys hear me right now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Okay, please go ahead.
And are you able to see my screen first?
Yeah, we can see.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me.
Professor
And,
Chow, can you make it the slideshow mode?
yes, this is a slideshow mode, I think.
We are not seeing the slideshow mode, but if you have difficulty.
Shall I try again?
No.
Yes, hold on a second, let me see. It's a full.
It's not
right?
a slideshow mode, but anyway, for the sake of time, please go ahead.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you for having me today. And today's topic is infrastructure investment and managerial oversight. I heard the intro, someone is going to cover the energy side, and I'm mainly here to talk about the two distinctive modes across the region, which is highway and rail. And on the left-hand side is the outline. On the right-hand side is our paper that collaborate with two senior government officials from China and Turkey. So just a quick intro before we get started is we had a great experience. My colleague, Dr. Volkan Vocek, and I had a great experience to work with Russian and Uzbekistan government officials over the past couple of years. We would like to share our experience with you throughout this presentation. And across the reports from ADB and the CRA Institute, it has highlighted 6 major corridors. At regional levels, you have trucks and freight rail. At sea levels, you have cars and transit. These are 2 distinctive asset class that has been highlighted by the officials.
Professor Chow, can you move to the PPT?
Yes, I think, yeah.
Yeah, can you move to the next slide?
I hope, Derek, yeah.
If you have difficulty, we can control the PPT.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so then you say that the next slide, please. Then we will click on the next slide.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Derek got my slide. Yeah, I'm on slide number 4 right now.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, this is the 2 distinctive asset classes. Next, thank you, Derek. So you have these 2 sets of policies, one for cars and another for transit, and which highlights 2 investment schemes lead to 2 different outcomes. So as a government, what exactly or investors are you trying to create for the city? Please next. Thank you, Derek. So what we tried over the past couple of years, we work with government officials around the cities, and we have been commonly asked and seeking for solutions. What we are suggesting is an investment solution to extract the maximum synergy between infrastructure investment and the city and regional development. And the solution shall help the economy to redirect resource for productive uses and precipitate in efficient allocation to the highest return activity at much lower cost. It also shall ensure the aggregate ESG return generated from the system optimum, not from the individual equilibrium. Let me show you the story. Next, please. So the conversation that we had with mayors, governors, or sometimes minister is the collision of cars and cities and the vicious circle it creates. It really triggers from one single root cause, which is a transit to auto divergence. The inner circle is the car's vicious circle. The outer one is the transit one. Next, please. So on the figure 2.2, what we've been thinking is the solutions And we suggest for the government official is a combination of managerial strategy and policy governance. So if we define the total disutility, figure 2.2, as an aggregate of user costs, travel time, safety, social costs, etc. As the volume increase, the total disutility of cars dramatically increase. However, the total disutility of transit dramatically decline. On figure 2.3, so if we were able to plot the total disutility of cars on the left-hand side and total disutility of transit on the right-hand side, if we were able to shift a certain amount of trips from cars into transit, to moving the point, individual equilibrium point from E to E point, we are actually able to reduce the total disutility of the entire system. So both modes could be better off. Next. So, but how exactly? It really requires policy formation, transit incentives measures, and all of these incentive measures to shifting the individual equilibrium points to system optimum by diverting a certain amount of trips from cars into transit throughout the city or throughout the region. Next. Yeah. So, however, this philosophy not able to fully apprehended by a lot of government officials, like the case in Indonesia. I would like to quickly mention this is a decision report by Bloomberg from last year. And we haven't received a major update from the Indonesia government so far, but our panelists, some of the speakers maybe from the Indonesia, perhaps can offer a good, valuable experience throughout the discussion. So figure 2.2, based on their announcement, if they fully invest the capital into highways and they completely ignore the rails and transit, they are actually increasing the total disutility of the entire system. So on the figure 2.6, what we found from all the cities, from Turkey, from Luxembourg, from Moscow, Russia, etc. All these progressive cities, they understanding the disciplines and difference between these individual equilibrium and system optimum. They are able to reduce the total disutility of the entire system by putting more capital into transit than cars. Next, please. The correct measure should follow on the green path, car disincentives and transit incentives. Next, Derek. So over the last couple of years, we realized one thing across the Central Asia regions and like the Uzbekistan case, the government is rethinking or reposition their assets to privatize it or try to changing the mandate for state-owned enterprise. Next, please. And we have highlighted the pros and cons of privatization based on our experience by working with different governments around the countries. Next, please. So we would like to differentiate the investment mindset between value creation versus value destructions. We would like to separate whether the mindset behind the older scheme, investment scheme, is asset recycling versus debt transfer. For the blue upper part, you will see the asset recycling program initially carried by the government. Government make infrastructure investment decisions by investing in bankable NPV positive projects, creates ESG greater values. So they are able to repeat it, do it again, and using the proceeds generated from the projects to keep it invested in the following rounds of projects. However, not all the projects are bankable or NPV positive. It may enter the floor of value destructions. It eventually lead to a project deficit. So these deficits being carried out by the state-owned enterprise balance sheet. The state-owned enterprise closely working with the government. So they just ask government to allocate subsidies from the government's account. it creates a debt transfer schemes, and so that these state-owned enterprise can keep operating this debt-laden asset classes.
Professor Chow, can you wrap up your presentation in 1 minute?
Yes, sure. Next, please. So when it comes to the value creations and value destruction, is the government keep investing in value destruction projects, they will see a diminishing of returns over a period of time, shown on the blue part. And next, please. And if it encounters a value destruction, it requires the countermeasure steps followed on these charts. Initially, you have invested in capital divided by debt and equity. And the purpose of making investment is to generate lucrative returns, lower the expense, so that's to maximize the profits. Now you enter a decision-making point from 3A, whether you would like to retain or distribute the earnings. And we always want to reinvest in value creation projects so that the invested capital could grow larger over a period of time. Next, please.
Professor Chow, can you, okay, so please conclude.
Yeah. The conclusion part is investment is a means to accelerate growth, but the growth itself is not the goal. The goal is to identify what kind of city and region do people want. And growth doesn't really translate well into value creation. We need to differentiate the investment scheme of asset recycling versus debt transfer, and understanding mindset of return on scale versus quality. And we would like to remind you that in investor mindsets behind two sets of investors. One is incumbent, another one is the barbarian. Les, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Chow. Very interesting presentation. That's just a reminder that all presenters already recorded their presentation. So, and then the pre-recorded presentation are available. So you don't need to go into details, but just keep your message very brief and very concise so that we can spare more time for the discussion and answers. So with that, let me invite discussant for this paper, Dr. Iskandar. Iskandar doesn't need any introduction, okay? So please go ahead, Iskandar. You have around 10 minutes.
Thank you, Lady Kim. I will keep shorter my comments, and as you said, maybe a discussion will also help us to identify a lot of issues relevant to this paper. I would like to thank authors Evgeny Chow and colleagues for giving me a chance to review their paper. The paper major contribution is addition knowledge to the body of literature on sustainable infrastructure in Asia and specifically in Central Asia. The paper highlights that infrastructure investment is a common scheme to boost economic productivity. It has to be carried holistically through multilateral layers of discussion and decision making. Many cities within the membership of the Central Asian Regional Economic Cooperation CAREC are easy in transition stage of repositioning cities long-term competitiveness or in the development stage of large-scale metropolitan planning. Common facts have been found that in these two settings, outstanding commitments on the modernization of efficient infrastructure systems and the transformative mindset to recapitalize cities' assets, both developable and utilized lands within the central business districts and surroundings. I would like to focus on some strengths and then a little bit of weaknesses of the paper. There are more strengths to the paper than weaknesses. The researchers marry the investment discipline and managerial oversight very well. From the outset, it is indicated that prior to fund allocation, a preliminary action is needed to decide what kind of city and region people want. Cities built around transit would look and operate drastically different from cities built around cars. The paper targets very important aspect of infrastructure investment managerial oversight. It describes the role of investments in boosting both GDP growth and economic performance of the countries. Especially in this paper, focuses investment into the creation of livable and sustainable cities. How and what will be a key decision-making structure for such investment? authors has been able very meticulously to establish and pinpoint linkages among various aspects of the infrastructure needs, technical elements and relevant elements of the infrastructure operation maintenance. Authors has been able to link operation efficiency of the infrastructure, technical and design elements, and requests for the funding indicators. Authors have been able also provide very in-depth theoretical background relevant to the topic. However, in times, authors seems to be too theoretical. While research results and findings are valuable, researchers should provide sound recommendations to policymakers. The language gets too technical, and I think it could be fixed to be accepted by policymakers. While it is suggested that the technical language is tuned down and simplified, authors on other area for the improvement is a focus on developing countries. Decision-making structure and system discussed in the paper is mostly relevant to the developed or middle or high-income economies. As most of the CARE countries are low-income and developing countries, there may be a need different decision-making approach in order to keep their economies and development pace agile with the compatibility to the much opportunities as they may come their way. Therefore, the authors could think of expanding the research analysis into less discussed and yet important spheres. All in all, I think this is very good paper and contribution to the book, and I thank and congratulate authors for their excellent work. Also, in process of reading, I learned a lot. For that, I would like to thank colleagues. I stop here, and I think, as you suggested, maybe we can receive more comments from readers and participants of the workshop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for Iskandar. Very thoughtful the feedback. I'm sure the Professor Chow will get a lot of help from his comment. So before asking Professor Chow to respond, I will open the floor and pick up a couple of questions, and then I'll ask the Chow to respond together. So you have any questions? Just write your questions or raise your hand. Okay, I don't see, right now I don't see any questions. Okay, so then I'll ask Professor Chow to respond to comments from the Iskandar, especially also for my side also. You pointed out lots of the important aspect of the infrastructure, development, managerial, the strategy, policy, governance, and institutional aspect of the privatization, all are important. So as Iskandar mentioned that, can you summarize some policy recommendations to the government officials who are participating in this workshop in terms of the infrastructure development, especially the focusing on the Central Asian countries? So with that, let me ask Chow to respond.
Yes, can you hear me right now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. I have heard the dialogue. The paper or the presentation is not necessarily tailored to the developed or developing country. Is what we would like to share with you guys, what have done throughout these different countries. And the experience really appears to be learning from the developed countries, because like the Western countries has already went through a lot of mistakes, like Los Angeles, like Las Vegas. It's pretty auto-oriented, and some of them are pretty like urban suburbia. So it's pretty spread out. All these cities, they are very, they try to overcome the auto divergence, and they put a tremendous amount of capital to transit throughout these years in Texas, in Houston, no matter it's light rails or high-speed rail, etc. But US doesn't really have a high-speed rail at this moment in particular. So the point what I'm making for these developing countries is to not make the mistakes that like the US has made, because this is not a correct path. And the correct measure should follow whichever can able to understanding or well interpret the individual equilibrium points to system optimum. And also understanding the dynamic between transit and auto incentive and disincentives. And the paper is not really emphasized because we are at Wharton Finance, we assume everyone knows finance very well. So we are talking about the managerial strategy and how to use government policy to enforce or redirect the flow of the entire system. That is the whole purpose of the paper and my presentations in essence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So Iskandar, any comments?
Yeah, thank
you mean,
Dr. Chao. I think your points are well taken. I consider that, yes, learning lessons from developed countries and not making their mistakes a very important message, which is also I consider. However, I think decision-making system, governance system, even investment structure, a little bit different in Central Asian countries, and also role of, as you said, cities. Their independence is much lower than in other countries, in developed countries. And decision making most of the time is centralized in the central government system. But overall, I can understand what you mean, that we should not invent the bicycle if it's already exists and learn from others. So I would say we can agree. But further, I mean it is needed to have a little bit lending to the soil, and I'm sure there is a much more policymakers are presented in this meeting. I'm sure when the country feedbacks are received, you will see some little bit different setup of decision making, mostly centralized because of the post-Soviet dependency, and also financial distribution is much more in the hands of central, and cities has less say in comparison with developed countries. But I think I can buy your argument for time being. Thank you.
May I just a quick response for your remarks? Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Yeah,
make your remarks please short.
Yeah, I understand. The article includes the Moscow government and the case from New York. And my presentation today to Derek, there's an appendix, and it also includes the Turkish case, Istanbul and Ankara, and as well as Tashkent case that we've been working with, the Tashkent city government. And I understand each country has pretty different, but the paper overall is we try to offer a big picture rather than going to like handpick the solutions. Thank you for today's comments, and I'll take into further consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, with that, for the sake of the time interest, let's close this first paper. Thank you very much for Chao and Iskandar for the very interesting presentation and then discussion. So I'm sure the Chao will further improve based on the comments or feedback from the Iskandar or other comments from the audience. Thank you very much. Now let's move to next paper. Presenter is Professor David Rowland-Horst. He's a professor in the Department of Economics and Agriculture and Resource Economics and University of California, Berkeley. Professor Horst has extensive research experience in economics related to international trade, development, energy, agriculture, and environment, authoring 5 books and over 100 articles and chapters in professional journal and books. So in addition to academic research, Professor Richard Rowland-Horst has served in several posts in the United States, Europe, and Asia. So with that, Professor Horst, please, floor is yours. You have around 10 minutes, please. So again, I mean, your presentation can be brief as your pre-record videos are available.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. I've cut my presentation in the slides in half, so I will ask the audience to look at the more detailed presentation online. Hello, everyone, and thank you, of course, to the organizers and our distinguished hosts from the Carrick Institute and ADBI. In this very brief presentation, I'm going to summarize for you some work I've been doing with my colleague Fritz Karl, who's an regional energy expert. And we're looking at the region from very much a forward perspective. We would like to talk about how opportunities and challenges in the present global energy economy can offer Central Asia a new pathway for developing its energy resources and thereby realizing more fully its economic potential. Central Asia's energy economy, we think, is at a really important crossroads, and the path that we recommend is a low carbon pathway towards very determined commitments for a new investment in renewable generation capacity and transmission capacity. We think that can be effected through a combination of government and private partnerships. We really hope that will create a new generation of opportunities for the region. The primary resources for energy have traditionally been fossil fuels, richly endowed in some countries, but not so plentiful in others. And despite the heavy commitments and the existing legacy of investment in fossil fuels, on the demand side, the global economy is going to be turning against those energy resources. As you probably are aware, profits for the major conventional energy companies have been cut in half since the COVID era began, and we feel that this is a foretaste of what we're going to see with responses to accelerating climate risk. So we think this is a time to rethink commitments to conventional energy and try to find a constructive pathway forward. This is essentially the view at the crossroads looking backwards. This is the past, and as you can see, very significant endowments of energy in the region. 6% of global oil trade, 14% of natural gas trade, and oil and natural gas together accounting for 85% of the region's energy. But these resources are relatively plentiful in only 5 of the member countries. So we've got very rich resources of conventional energy, but very concentrated resources. The potential in renewables is much more uniformly distributed around the region. And it's a very superior resource. Wind resources are extraordinarily promising in this region, as you can see by these comparisons of average wind speed. Solar resources are obviously well distributed across all equatorial regions, but there's something about the endowments in the Central Asian region in terms of cost effectiveness. These are very low cost opportunities for developing solar, and in proximity to very dynamic markets for energy, the fastest growing regions of southern China and European Union. At the same time, the costs, as you know, are plummeting. The solar energy costs have fallen 85% in the last decade, 70% the reductions for wind. And they're all crashing through the boundaries of conventional energy prices at this point. So renewables are already competitive, and they're going to become cheaper than most conventional energy by the end of this decade. This creates a huge opportunity for profit-oriented private sector investment in these energy resources. And we believe it also provides extraordinary leverage for future development in the region through low-cost clean energy. And this, I hope, this story resonates with all the major points that were made by our keynote speakers about sustainable pathways, new and more inclusive investments in regional infrastructure generally, but particularly for energy. Here's just one dimension of this. There's much more to cover in the paper, but this is what we call temporal arbitrage. It shows the loads or the demands for energy in the European Union, and at the same time, with accounting for the time delays, the supply of renewable energy from wind and especially solar in China, they're almost completely synchronous. And because these, when you're exporting energy electrons rather than molecules, this can happen almost instantaneously. So these load and capacity pathways are extremely important to Europe, which is already reaching a kind of saturation point with its ability to build out solar. Just really almost a beautiful opportunity for synchronizing Central Asian and Western Chinese renewable capacity with the largest market on the same continent. What we're really talking about here is a three-part energy transition strategy. And we discuss it in more detail in the paper, but basically the three stages of this. The current situation continuing, but with primary carbon fuel exports, but using the resources from those exports to redirect investment commitments towards a renewable future. Financing growth and transition, not just for renewables in the traditional carbon fuel exporters, but throughout the CARC region to integrate renewable energy resources more uniformly around the region and provide trading mechanisms, reform the institutions too, so that energy can be more freely traded within the regions. This will provide tremendous leverage for more inclusive growth. The mid-carbon phase would be to basically transition to natural gas, which is fired locally. Natural gas would not be exported, but it would be used to fire electric power generation at the site in the gas fields, so that again, it's for exporting electrons, not for exporting molecules. And hydrogen, maybe. We're very receptive to the idea of hydrogen, but right now this transition is about going from oil to natural gas, but to localize natural gas to electric power generation for this transition. And then finally, a low carbon future financed by those exports, which allows for 100% renewable exports from one of the regions of the world which is most richly endowed with that. What we see now is this is an opportunity to use more equitably distributed or more uniformly distributed resources of renewables around the CARC region and making investments for integrated development of those regional energy production systems and markets for not only for export, but for sub-regional growth. So phases 2 and 3 would provide opportunities for more inclusive internal regional investment. And we hope that the CARC countries, which are energy exporters now, would join in investing in their neighboring countries to expand energy grid networks. And those investments would basically create more extensive supply opportunities for renewables to leave the region, but also to be shared internally. And in that way, we see energy playing a similar role to what manufacturing did for the dynamic East Asian economies. You remember the story about those miracle economies. The export opportunities drove infrastructure investments to create supply chains all around Asia and essentially expand the opportunities for industrialization and growth on the basis of manufacturing exports. We believe that energy exports can perform the same function in Central Asia. They can finance investment, regionalization, integration, and convergence, more inclusive growth, particularly creating opportunities for lower income countries which have rich endowments of renewables to realize their potential through collaborative regional investment and much stronger private sector participation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Rolando. Very interesting the paper. Also, the very good, interesting suggestion regarding the 3-stage regional energy transition in Central Asian countries. Then let me invite a discussant, Dr. Previcius, who is Associate Professor at the Department of the Liberal Arts, Indian Institute of Technology. His research interests are in macroeconomics and international trade and finance. He has also published more than 20 research papers in international peer-reviewed journals. He was selected as a young economist from India to participate in the first Nobel laureate meeting on economic science in Germany in 2011. Also, he was invited as a resource person by various prestigious institutions such as Asian Development Bank and Bank of Indonesia, and so on. So Professor Pradith, please, floor is yours. You have around 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for inviting me to discuss this paper. I'll just share my slides. So thank you. It's my pleasure to discuss the paper written by Professor David Rowland. So this is a summary of the paper. This paper examines the potential transition pathways for the energy infrastructure in Central Asian economies. The author used different pathway scenarios, which include different assumptions about the energy policy, energy resources mix, energy carriers, distribution, infrastructure, and export demand. And the key findings from the paper is that, the author recommends 3 stages of transition. One is the first one, 2020, the high carbon related exports, then mid carbon by 2030, then low carbon by 2050. So this is the key findings from the paper, and I'm just dividing my comments based overall comments as well as specific comments. I found this research paper is very interesting. However, still there's a scope for improvement. It's for me, this paper seems to be a bit lengthy, and issues are discussed in a scattered way. Thus, shortening the paper would improve the readability. So, all my suggestion would be based, primarily trying to improve the paper when you are going to submit to the edited book. Similarly, the motivation of the study and research gap quite seems to be vague in the introduction part. So, this section can be improved. And when I look at the structure and the structure of the paper, the specific comments, abstract may be improved by including the key findings. So that is actually missing in the abstract. And introduction, as I said, the motivation can be improved further to substantiate the research question. And it seems to be, for me that the existing literature on this research issue is missing in the introduction, or next even second section. So it is. So it will be good if you can provide what is happening in the existing literature and tell us what is the experience of developed countries during the energy transition period. So and it will be great if you can provide one small section of how your paper contribute to the existing literature. At this moment, this is not clear to me. The final, in the introduction part, the approach of the paper is not given. Therefore, it's a bit difficult to understand what is happening in the coming section for a reader. So it is better to provide a small paragraph on the approach of the paper. And for me, I believe, if you can club this section 2, the background, that can be shortened and it can be merged with the introduction part so that the readability of the paper may be improved. So this is a very my suggestion. It can be, it can be accepted or it's up to you. So, but from a reader's perspective, the section can be shortened or merged with the introduction. And section 3, the transition implication. In this section, author focuses on the sustainable energy export. But when we read the introduction part, the section is not well motivated. So it is better to provide, a discussion related to, energy export and its importance. And similarly, figure 1 that requires a bit more detailed interpretation also specify the methodology used for estimation. On page number 11, the link between 3rd and 4th paragraph is not convincing. So therefore, I suggest, author to, rewrite those parts. And the author claim that the trade in hydrogen cost is competitive. The statement requires a detailed justification. And in that section, I feel like some conclusive findings should be reported. Therefore, the reader can easily follow the paper. And look at the section 4, the transition pathway. This section requires some more refinement of what is the rationale for proposing a three-phase approach to the regional energy transition, and how these pathways are arrived. The detailed argument should be provided here. I mean, that actually, I mean, there is a that is missing in this section. And finally, the section 5, SDGs, and I felt this section stand alone from the previous section. So what is the need of bringing EDI and energy poverty gap, etc., with energy exports? What that was, I mean, key issue was addressed in the previous section. So when we read this section 5, it diverts the focus of the paper and readability. So this section may be excluded from the paper, all up to you, but if you wanted to include this, I suggest to rewrite the introduction by including the importance of this section as well, so that the readability may be improved. So this is from my side. Thank you. Thanks a lot. It's my pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Brother. Very detailed comments and feedback on the paper. I'm sure there will be lots of the areas can be done with your comments. So I ask David Roland Tost to respond to the comments by Professor Priest.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. I'm very grateful for these constructive comments. They're quite detailed. It looks pretty much like a referee report, very responsible attention to the details. I don't think we want to belabor them all with this audience, but I'm very grateful for them and we'll take full account of those suggestions. I believe that attending to them will result in a much improved contribution. Thank you. Okay. There's nothing here that I would contest. I mean, including the SDGs or not including them, that is an open question, but since one of the main themes of this study is sustainability, and we really want the region to move in this direction and pay maybe less attention to simple net present value investment strategies, we might try to find a way to mainstream those ideas. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so another question from the floor is that one question is that what are the challenges that the Central Asian countries get stuck in the pace of the transition, considering the infrastructure will already exist and transition may prove expensive.
It will be expensive, but it'll be much more expensive to be unprepared for the decline in demand for conventional energy. I mean, I think that all conventional energy around the world is facing tremendous adjustment risk at the moment. As you know, the OECD is already determined to move to a lower carbon future. And as I understand it, the president of China announced yesterday that China was going to officially commit to net zero by 2060. So I think the writing is on the wall for conventional energy, and the only rational strategy for them is to try to find an alternative pathway. Fortunately, there are very rich energy resources that remain in the region, but they're a different kind. And I think that this is an opportunity to encourage them to use these for more inclusive sub-regional development. There's a great opportunity here.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes. I see one hand raised. Is Aliyah Taniko Bareba. Are you available to speak? So we can switch on your microphone if you want. Okay, maybe there is the technical connection, the issues and so on. So I think very impressive, and also the very good suggestion for the Central Asian countries. You said, I mean, it could be very expensive, but the acting without action, the cost will be much higher.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, to be on the supply side of these markets is going to be a very it's going to be a very big struggle because of the changes in the demand side. And I really feel that CARG has an opportunity because it has an alternative pathway. Other oil exporters won't have these alternatives. Natural gas in places like Siberia and Venezuela are not going to have the solar and the wind options. So I think they should use this opportunity for reinvestment, but I'm not discouraging due diligence. I think that there should be very detailed studies of the feasibility of this of these infrastructure transitions. But there's no question that the opportunity for lower cost energy already exists. Renewables costs have gone down so rapidly that they offer a completely new paradigm for energy-based development in low-income countries, and we're going to see it. I want the region to realize the benefits of that because you'll see much more inclusive growth than you see from conventional energy development.
Yeah, especially I think your suggestion is very sensible, and I'm sure the saturation countries will should consider the options for the transition. I'm sure also the ADB has the correct program under which the energy is one of primary sectors. So I think your suggestion should be considered in the broad framework of the energy development, the energy transition to low carbon and then renewable energy institute. Thank you very much. I'm sure the participants will get a lot of insight from your suggestions. So thank you very much for your excellent.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. I do hope so. I do hope that they can benefit from these suggestions, and also the development partners have to be part of the process, as they have been in transport and all the other really great initiatives in the region. Thank you.
I think really great. To hear your the presentation, and also I like to thank Pravidus for providing very detailed the comments, detailed feedback.
No, we welcome them. They're very constructive. Thank you, and thanks to you for chairing this session.
Thank you very much. Also, I like to thank all the audiences to listen from the presentations so intensively. Thank you very much. With that, let's close this session. Thank you very much. Please join me thanking Professor David Rowland and also discussing Professor Pravidus. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nella.
Thank you, Didi Kim. Now, this very, I learned a lot from these two presentations and the comment from discussion to this first session. I think without taking a long time for introduction, we will go directly to session 2. And the moderator for the session 2 is Mr. Isakan Ayubi, and he's the Chief of Capacity Building Division, CARG Institute. I don't have to introduce him again because I introduced him in the beginning. So Ayub, I think without further ado, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Neela. Thank you very much, and Dr. Kim for the great moderation. And I do appreciate the presenters and the discussants taking time very seriously. Especially, I really enjoyed the first presenter and the second presenters and Dr. Skandar's response, as well as the second discussants. So we're just exactly targeting comments that demonstrates the addition that this particular chapter brings into the literature and the weakness and strengths, as well as the improvements you suggest. So please keep it in line. I don't like to just continue talking since Dr. Kim, Deputy Dean Kim, started this session. The second session is the continuation of the first session. So I would like to start, and again, I would like to remind presenters that your pre-recorded presentation is already posted on the CARG Institute Learning platform. So this is available for all users to access. So please keep it short and just recap the main points of your paper or chapters. So with that, now we go back to Professor Nicholas, is the founding principal of Renaissance Urbain, a strategic advisory office specialized in developed and emerging countries' urban systems, established in 2010. A former senior advisor to the President of Paris, apologies for my French pronunciation, Île-de-France region, he has created the Grand Paris Alliance for Metropolitan Development, and awarded not-for-profit think tank in 2011. He's the co-chair of the T20 Saudi Arabia Task Force on Infrastructure Finance. As he was during the T20 Japan, he advises the U20 and G20 engagement group for cities with a focus on innovation, inclusion, and nature-based solutions. He's a fellow from Global Solutions Initiative in Berlin. Professor Nicholas, the floor is yours. Please be precise. 10 minutes is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to, yes. Is it okay with the with my presentation now?
We can see your presentation. If you could press the presentation display, that full mode.
It should be okay now,
yes.
right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
So thank you so much, and thank you. I feel humbled by the quality of the presentations and the precision of what was displayed so far in terms of mobility or energy. My focus will be, however, a little bit different. When I was asked initially to participate, invited to participate to this workshop, and it was supposed to be physical, right? That was before COVID. I thought that we would try to connect the work we did, especially with ADBI and in Yoshino last year, regarding quality infrastructure investment principles, and on the one hand, and urbanization on the other hand, and apply that to the case of Central Asia, with the focus here on smart cities. For one very good reason. You can see that the issue is booming, especially in government spheres. There are a lot of very visible investments, especially in the capital cities, in the different countries in the region. But on the other hand, this is completely uncoordinated. It's mostly about either, I would say, a government-driven image or very capital-intensive investments, but which do not target sustainability, right? They target modernization, transformation. And what I try to do, preparing for this session and workshop, was try to understand where we are with this question of smart cities now in the very context of Central Asian cities, and what is missing, and how could this driver, because it is a driver, right? It's directing a lot of attention, a bit from China, from the Russian Federation, from Turkey, from Europe, from North America, from India, from the Middle East. There is money flowing in. There are needs, but this is not so well coordinated, and this does not really yet tackle sustainability per se. The other element for me, which was critical, which was to find a way to connect cities as places, right? Dots, along a narrative of interconnected networks. And we have been talking with Professor Chow just before about gas. When you look at the interconnection of the power grids, for example, in the core of the Central Asian region, that is Uzbekistan and its immediate neighbors, you can see that the integration is even more advanced. But so far, this has had no effect, right? And this is not correlated to investments at the urban level. So we have things that are moving on, and I would say this is time to raise the question of how to build connections. In this image, you can see a very typical setting, right, of a Central Asian city, which used to be a settlement, which is now a city expanding. This is Nukus in the Aral Sea region in Karakat, Pakistan. I made this photo about a year ago. And I prefer to start with this visualization than with this, which is the more typical what you can see displayed in all series of articles and comments, which such as a president of Uzbekistan visiting Tashkent city, one of the sort of call for smart city, you know, high-end development in the core of the Uzbek capital, or another visit of another president in Kazakhstan, in Akbol, where you can see also the very typical display of metering and home comfort, which are displayed by the imagery of smart cities. And at this moment, I would say, if there was to be a Silk Road kind of smart cities, it would be something centralized, government-led, with urban change and digital innovation, but the question of unlocking private sector investments and civil society connections remains to be analyzed. And if you look further to other locations such as Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, what you can see is actual landscapes, right? But with not yet investments of transformation, such as you can see in Kazakhstan for over a decade, or what has been kickstarted in just the last couple of years in Uzbekistan. So what I'm saying is that the situation is changing relatively quickly, and probably this is the right moment to move from, I would say, images and display and centralized approaches to urban change to something much more, I would say, system oriented. And the reason why I thought we would try to address this issue from a Silk Road smart cities point of view, right, was also to refer to history, but also to refer to the fact that there is a very typical design which you have all seen, right? Either if you have been to Nur Sultan, formerly Astana, or because you have read the news. And this is fascinating because Nur Sultan is very far actually from Tashkent and Ashgabat. But you can see a very similar patterns of design, meaning that we are not so much talking about city transformation through design. We are talking about a pathway of deep transformation of inherited planning and infrastructure at urban level and also inter-urban level inherited from the Soviet period in the context of now with digitalization, which is accelerating everything. But out of these images, what you can do is something very difficult. And when you move beyond, I would say, government, entreprise, and beyond design, it's not so easy. You can see, such as in Uzbekistan, I put those two photos with the president of Uzbekistan visiting an IT park in Tashkent, and then just a few weeks later, students from the Management Development Institute of Singapore in a field trip at the exact same place. So you can see there is an appetite, and this is related, for example, to such projects, Tashkent 2025. You can see in neighboring capital cities also such, I would say, modern approach to city transformation towards 2030, 2040. And this is a background of transformation, which of course can connect with like infrastructures being embedded in the sustainable development goals, for example. But if you look at some cases such as Dushanbe, for example, on the one hand, there were disagreements. On the other hand, the city has now been establishing a unitary enterprise smart city. So these are bits and pieces of programs such as, Dushanbe for the period 2025, which are led by cities, but which are very closely connected to government spheres. And what we don't have yet in this equation is clearly some transparency and accountability and visibility about the rhythm of private investments that will be driven by this, and how those private investments can be included, I would say, in the sustainability pathways that all countries in the region are now trying to reach out. And it's very interesting to see that, in fact, now this is bubbling, if I may say so. You have got an assemblage. It's a patchwork of influences. In that way, I found this was very typical also from Central Asia, from a long-term historic perspectives. And this is the case, right? And you have got sort of very typical features of smart cities with the central control desks and etc., such as in Akol in Kazakhstan. But also, on the other hand, you've got like Chinese developers, not even smart tech companies, but Chinese developers scouting the cities in the region. I saw that in Namangan, that is in Fergana Valley in Uzbekistan, very big Chinese developer Vanda promoting smart city in this second tier city, which was actually just a couple of buildings with a little bit of labeling and branding. Whether in another hand, in Kyrgyzstan, for example, I took this this example in Kyrgyzstan, and I don't know, in Kyrgyzstan, where you had an agreement signed just a few months ago with a couple of Russian companies, Rosatom Infrastructure Solutions and Citronics, after the government went out of a contract with a company Huawei from China. So we are really now in a context where you've got a competition to access to markets and to state and to national fundings with a blend of semi-autonomous city decisions. And this is leading to I would say, a competition also between standards and norms, which might just look as an issue from an urban perspective, which I think is a bigger issue, because this is also about how this will be coordinated in the future and how to reach out to sustainability goals in the next month. So let me get to the next one. There is an even more, I would say, maybe difficult issue, and I will just briefly touch upon here because this is not the core of our
Professor
discussion.
Nicholas,
yeah.
Of course, your input is very important. Please, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Where you can see the question of the mobilization and how the civil society, because when we are talking about private investments, it's also about how the civil society is connected to future markets, is something more difficult. And so far, there is a lot of concern about privacy, about control, etc., which refers to the first presentation and discussion we had about trust. My concluding point would be 2 points. First, Central Asian smart cities begin their journey in a world that is already massively urbanized and digitalizing very intensively, with a sort of late arrival on this market of smart cities. However, it comes right after significant transformations, the issuance of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Quality Infrastructure Investment Principles. I am calling here for, I would say, a smart cities approach that is urban transformation and modernization out of a shared background of gain plans in not just capital cities, but also secondary and third tier cities. With Central Asia could be a role model if there would be, I would say, active regional cooperation around this question of smart cities, backed by the growing integration of infrastructure systems in the region, be it about roads, be it about energy, and especially power grids. And this is what it could look like, if you give me 30 seconds, based upon this diagram from the World Economic Forum, where you can see that electric power transmission and distribution and electrification is something that is more commonly advanced in the different countries of the regions. And that could be the background of a, let's say, a normative and standard convergence among the different countries that could help go beyond this kind of wild east or wild west competition for image and for technology, to rely on energy infrastructure as advanced factors of integration, to develop regional cooperation on green and blue infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And maybe, since we are here with CAREC and ADBI, use the quality infrastructure investment principles as a common set of reference for everyone, for IT investments, but also for energy investments and for city leadership and city transformation. Therefore, expanding the value chain of urban innovation, which is taking place or starting in the different capital cities, to the whole of the urban systems of the countries and in the region, and maybe also raise the question of how to create a kind of regional smart city standard being worked on with the MDBs, with the World Bank, with ADB and others, so that urban and digital innovation are really become transformational, and in the background of infrastructure investments can be a real driver for sustainability in the region.
Well, thank you so much, Nicholas. Indeed, exactly, this is what we need. Our call for paper was exactly this. So you bring in practical experience as a practitioner. I think this is very good for our stakeholders. And we would like this call for paper eventually become some sort of a guide for member countries to understand what's happening around the world in terms of best practices and lessons learned I think what you discussed, this was fantastic, and this is exactly what's needed. And I hope that this also goes back to Dr. Iskandar's comment to the first paper. We do need practical, stepwise guidance and policy guidance to member countries on how to take different kind of measures in unlocking private investment for sustainable infrastructure, whether it be cities or any kinds of infrastructure. Thank you so much, Nicholas. And I also like your connection of connecting, bringing in civil society, transparency. This indeed goes back to the opening or the keynote presentation. This is very important. So with that said, I would like to hand over the floor to our discussant, as Professor Liu. Professor Liu, you will have a comprehensive introduction when you present your paper. I just would like to highlight you are the founding director of Center for Human and Economic Development Studies of Peking University. So Professor Liu, the floor is yours. Please be precise since we ran out of time. So the floor is yours to respond to Nicholas.
Thank you very much. Derek, is Derek there? I did have a PPT, and I wonder if I could use that PPT.
Yes, Derek could certainly do that. Ms. Suzu-san and Derek-san, could you please display Professor Liu's presentation? They will be displaying your presentation, Professor Liu. You could just continue with your initial thoughts.
Okay. Well, first of all, I really enjoyed reading Professor Bouchard's paper on Silk Road smart cities in Central Asia. I must also confess that Central Asia is by no means a region which I know. It is of course on this BII thing, and Central Asia is indeed a very important region, so I really learned a great deal from reading the paper. Now, could I, Derek, next slide?
Yes, please. Your presentation is here now. Derek, please.
Yeah. Next slide, please, Derek. Anyway, so I really learned a lot. Now, having said that, I suppose I'm also expected to be critical a bit. Well, if I want to be critical, then it's towards the last bit of the points, the last few points, which Nicholas actually presented and talked about, which is the relationship between urbanization of smart cities and economic development. If you like, it's basically we are talking about a trio process, which is industrialization, structural transformation, and urbanization. The old paradigm is simply, you have these three blocks: industrialization, structural transformation, and urbanization. Urbanization is the end result, so to speak, of that process. Now, if we are talking about smart cities, it's as if the end result becomes the engine of development in that region. Or is it indeed meant to be the engine of economic development or driver for economic development? After all, you do need, as well as urbanization, as well as the smart cities, you do need a healthy, prosperous economy. Otherwise, the whole thing, the smart cities and so on will simply collapse. So if I want to be critical, maybe that relationship between urbanization, economic development, structural transformation, and industrialization, that relationship probably will need to kind of need to be made clearer. Now, actually, this is something which I did about 10 years ago when I was at the ADBI. I looked at some data, and basically this graph presents the relationship between the level of economic development measured in per capita GDP, which is on the horizontal axis, and the rate of urbanization percent of urban population, or measured on the vertical axis. And here, in this study, we looked at PRC, Brazil, India, Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, Philippines, Malaysia, for over 2 decades, 20 years, 1990 to 2010. And each color or shape of each set of dots would represent one country. And you see, remarkably, they are on the more or less on the same line, really. It would be great, if we look at every country to see, you have a scattered diagram like this and see what is the relationship. So it seems that there is a clear relationship between the level of economic development and urbanization, sustainable urbanization. Of course, we're talking about sustainable, but because otherwise, you could make everyone live in the city, but if the economy is not there, we don't have a prosperous economy, then things will just collapse. In the case of China, actually, in the late 50s and 60s, we did try to do that, and it was not sustainable. As a result, China entered into a period of 3-year hardship, which also regrettably involved famine, actually. So that historical lesson probably needs to be kind of really taken on board. And the relationship between economy and urbanization, smart cities will need to be looked at probably more closely if possible. Derek, could I move on to the next slide? And then, okay, this was the traditional paradigm of industrialization, economic structural transformation, urbanization, the trial process. Urbanization is the end result of the process. Next, Derek, next. Okay, well, I think I'll skip over this. This is about World Bank 2009 report, which is about urbanization. What are the driving forces behind urbanization? Now, this is what probably I kind of could say a bit more. Now, we also still have 3 blocks: industrialization, economic structural transformation, and urbanization. We still have these 3 blocks, but the process becomes very different. Or the role of urbanization becomes very different. Urbanization here is not necessarily the end result of the process, but could be, depending on which arrow you look at, could be a driver behind the development. Now, this is a new kind of, we are really entering a new paradigm of thinking about things, about these 3 blocks. We have moved away from the traditional paradigm. Maybe this is the sort of paradigm in which we can think about. I'm not saying that urbanization is necessarily simply the end result. It's just the end of the process, not the beginning of the process. It could be the beginning of the process, but perhaps we need to kind of spell out the logic behind, spell out the process behind. We need to spell out the process a bit more clearly. Now, exactly what things may be like in Central Asia, I do not know. I hope very much to learn actually from Nicholas and from the study.
Professor Liu,
and it is indeed a very important region. And
Professor Liu, you have 1 minute to conclude.
Okay, yeah. Now, this actually something like urbanization playing an important role in driving force economic development in the country where that happened is China. We have this land financing process which meant urbanization played a very important role in driving for the economic development in China. So that China again may have some experience to share. And finally, I will also want to mention smart city. Shenzhen is definitely a smart city now. Vietnam. Huawei is their headquarters, where the headquarters of Huawei is. But it started as a special economic zone. It started as very much an export processing zone. So the relation, well, at the final final point is that if the paper needs to be strengthened, perhaps it is this relationship, which could be discussed much more. Thank you. I really learned a great deal from reading the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Liu. Yes, very, very good and constructive comments. Certainly, we will give the floor to Professor Nicholas to respond if there is no any other questions from the floor. Do we have any questions from the floor? And Professor Nicholas, before you address the discussant's comments, I'm not sure if you have received your pre-recorded presentation, because we do really need that, and we would like to upload that on our e-learning platform for further capacity building and educational purposes. So I think what you bring in is exactly what we want. So please do share your pre-recorded presentation, and we'll post on our e-learning platform. So now the floor is yours. So I don't see any question from the floor. So you could respond to Professor Liu's constructive and comprehensive feedback.
Thank you very much also, Professor Liu, for your kind remark. Actually, the paper I shared, or the project of the paper which I shared, would be more of a programmatic proposal than a full paper, absolutely, highlighting a number of topics, perhaps in a different way than than in a classical academic format. However, to achieve, I would say, a more comprehensive understanding of the current situation and challenges and options also regarding the question of smart cities, specifically in the Central Asian region, I would completely agree that a sort of a deeper understanding of structural factors of economic transformation and economic growth would have to be taken into account. However, what I try to do is, considering the fact that when we are talking about smart cities, and this was by purpose, we are not talking about something that is governed, all right? Infrastructure systems are being governed rightly or wrongly, but they are being governed, right? Either at national level or with MDBs or with bilateral cooperation. By no way, this is something that is just in the hand of the private sector and a couple of investors. When we are talking about smart cities, it's quite the opposite, right? It has been, at least from, I would say, a Western perspective. In China, it has been, of course, different, right? But it has been capital-driven. It has been company-driven, mostly. It has been market-driven, with consumers being embedded. And this has all been sort of mixed in kind of understanding of transformation. When you look also at the history of smart cities, and there have been a couple of very remarkable recent research, right, about, for example, the number of articles, research articles, dealing with IT systems applying to urban context, right? There were only a few in the beginning of the 90s and a few dozens at the end of the 90s. And then at the turn of the millennium and starting 2005, 6, 7, at this moment, when the UN acknowledged that the world was being more urban than rural, etc., the curve starting to rise. And now we have, then we had a couple of hundreds, and then now we have thousands on all a series of different topics. And it's about everything: governance, people, technology, sustainability, etc. In the context of Central Asia, the interesting thing is there is a background, a rather common background of planning and planning procedures and infrastructures linked with that, that is directly inherited from the Soviet period, right? Also now we are 30 years afterwards. So of course, things have changed. But with the exception of Kazakhstan, where things have started since the mid or end 90s with the development of Astana, which attracted a lot of worldwide attention and a number of companies and all sorts of things. In Uzbekistan, in Kyrgyzstan, in Turkmenistan, in Tajikistan, this is much more recent, right? So there is a kind of historical pathway of transformation which is extremely interesting. And what is happening also is you can see a structure of modernization, of managing growth and managing investments in the context of, yeah.
A valuable comments. Really appreciate it. If you could take it keep it short, and at the same time, the floor is open to other panelists to raise some questions.
All right.
Nicholas, because this is a great opportunity. I think Nicholas is bringing a lot on the table. And please, so you don't have the option of raising hand. You could raise your hand virtually. I could see you here and give you the floor. Any other question to Nicholas? No question. Professor David, maybe you have a question for Nicholas, no? Omid John, I see you there. Do you have any question? So this is a great opportunity. We could just engage with Nicholas. He brings a lot of experience. Okay, I give the floor back to Professor Liu while other colleagues could think of a question.
No, just to add maybe I'm just to add a point to make perhaps to make the picture more complete, and that is, you know, if we think of Singapore, Singapore is very much a city-state. It, you know, with this trial process of didn't really materialize that much in the case of Singapore. So if Central Asia, some of Central Asia, we can maybe one way to approach Central Asia is to say, you know, they could be, we could liken them to Singapore, but is that realistic? You know, basically we have just city-states there. So really for larger countries, for countries of some size, basically we are talking about a trio process: industrialization, economic structural transformation, and urbanization. But urbanization doesn't have to be the end process, to the end result of the process. It could be big, you know, it could play a role in driving force economic development, as to an extent happened in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Liu. I see the Professor David has switched on his camera. Please
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
I wasn't sure if you were referring to this David or Darish David, but in any case, I do have to say I want to commend both Nicholas and his commenter for the emphasis on second-tier cities. I think that they've been really unjustly neglected in all of the policy dialogue, and that's really a mistake, because they're going to provide the leadership for new models of urbanization and national integration. I think that we really have to kind of level our perspective in the policy world to try to identify the needs of those cities, because they really represent the cutting edge. The capital cities they have so many forms of inertia built into them. I think the real opportunities for innovation, institutional innovation, are in the second-tier cities. And I was excited to see both Nicholas and Minqian emphasize that.
Thank you. If you allow me for...
Yes, please go direct, no problem.
And you cut me if I am too long, right, Isa? But if you would allow me, I would just like to share a proposal or something to put on the table, then it can be discussed or refined. If you look at the geography of the region and of the main cities like Tashkent, Dushanbe, Bichkek, or Almaty, for example, they are very sort of relatively close to one to each other. And in this context of mega regions that are being developed across the world and across borders, this could be the backbone of, I would say, converging infrastructure systems that would be supporting also urban development with IT along common standards and reaching out to sustainability. This would leave Ashgabat, which is a little bit further in the west, out of the equation, at least out of this equation of a connected mega region. And of course, Nur Sultan is far more north, right, than those cities. So it's not very easy to define a kind of exact geographic scope, But what is certain, there's the kind of spin or backbone of cities. And if you look at Uzbekistan, you could also connect with Samarkand, which is not so far, even to Bukhara, maybe even as far as to Nukus, reaching out to the spin like of a fish with those cities connected, which are already somehow connected by decisions in terms of environment or in terms of power grid futures and other energy infrastructures. I believe this could be, in principle, a backbone, but there are tons of issues ranging from, I would say, national agreements between cities and national governments, and including urbanization as an issue of regional cooperation specifically, which is not really the case at this moment, which would need to be tackled. I don't think it is possible to do that from an urban point of view. I do think this is possible, even if it could take some time, from an infrastructure standpoint. And this is why I believe there could be a kind of Silk Road rationale to connect cities and urbanization and infrastructure development as a kind of specific model that would be a little bit different from the Chinese model that has been expressed by by our colleague, and that would be a little bit different than what you can find also elsewhere, be it in the neighboring Russian Federation or elsewhere in Europe or in the US.
Great points, Nicholas. Indeed, this is the kind of interactions we need. I see Professor Yoshino has opened his mic. Do you have a question, Professor Yoshino, or a comment?
Okay. Thank you very much. I cannot show my face. It's a very good presentation. However, Karek region, Central Asia, is less densely populated compared to other regions. So urbanization and city transport must have been different from other regions. So I'd like to know what kind of proposals for those less densely populated regions.
Yeah, if I may.
Please, Nicholas.
Yes.
Dean Yoshino, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this is really an important question. I will leave a little bit Kazakhstan out of the answer because this is such a huge geographic area. But if you consider, for example, Uzbekistan, it is very clear that while there is a large proportion of the population which is young and a large proportion of the population which is still living in rural environments, there is also a trend towards lifestyles and expectations that are more common to what you can see on the internet and globally. The main question here I see is not so much how to import smart cities in the villages. Also, this would also be a question linked with energy systems and mobility and how to use opportunities of digitalization of the society and work and etc. Then how to manage the development of rural areas so that we don't see the same rural exodus as we saw in Europe or in France, for example, after World War II, or in China, for example, although it was controlled since the launch of the reforms in the beginning of the 80s. There is something here which is not related to smart cities and smart stuff and devices and etc., but which is related to how to manage the development of second and third tier cities. I've mentioned that, but also the village settlements. And this is I would say, a very difficult question. If we wanted to be complete here, the question of Silk Road smart cities would have to be supplemented by Silk Road smart villages, if I may say so, because I do believe there is the possibility to achieve a very decent livelihood in rural areas. However, there are very difficult and challenging questions ahead because as it was mentioned by Professor Liu, level of income in rural environments still is generally lower or even much lower than what can be achieved in capital cities or in cities. So I would say this is a very important challenge ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I would like to highlight the point that you raised at the end, is this rural urban migration, which is one of the detrimental impacts of urbanization, I would say.
Yeah.
And this, I think, happens in countries where these countries are economically based on agriculture, maybe traditionally based on agriculture economy. If you have these rural urban migration, then people move from villages to these smart cities, whatever you call them. And then that has a negative impact on this domestic production, whatever agricultural product they have. I think this is what's happening. We have a presenter from my country of origin, Afghanistan, at the end country perspective. So he might share some of the experience we are having in Afghanistan. So with that said, I would like to conclude this presentation, and appreciate Nicholas, Professor Liu, Professor David, and Dean Yoshino, and other colleagues for participating. Very interactive and very educative. And I really encourage our colleagues from this is not only an interaction between scholars and experts. We hope that we have country representatives engage, because this is where you could just engage and maybe clarify some of the points. And especially, Nicholas, your presentation provides practical guidance, and that's helpful for all countries. All right, with that said, we go to the second session. Our presenter is Wawan. Wawan is, I just pull out your, okay, I just pull out here. Yeah. So Wawan is a senior policy analyst and head of international tax working group, Center for State Revenue Policy, Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. So he has extensive experience in economic and development policy decision-making at the Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. He was assigned to various senior positions, mostly in the Fiscal Policy Agency concerning macroeconomic policy, taxation, and international cooperation. Wawan also worked as a special advisor to the Dean of the Asian Development Bank, ADBI, and a senior economist at the Capacity Building and Training Department in ADBI, based in Tokyo, Japan, from 2016 to 2019. Wawan, you have an impressive background. I would like to stop here, just give you the floor. Please go ahead with your presentation. You have 10 minutes. I recall you have your pre-recorded presentation. Please be precise with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ayub. First, I would like to thanks to ADB Institute and CAREC Institute for inviting me for this very important event. I know this my presentation is quite different with other presentation, because I will present the case of country in Southeast Asia, and this event is concentrated on the Central Asian country. But I hope the participant can take a lesson learned from what I want to present. So this is the background. Actually, this background is already mentioned in the afternoon by Dr. Iskandar, that the ADB study that said that the ASEAN, developing Asia, will need to invest about $1.7 trillion each year from 2016 to 2023, 2030. And there is still insufficient infrastructure investment in the developing Asia, and it's about 92% of the infrastructure funding in developing Asia is sourced from the public sector. And in case of Indonesia, because I would like to present the case of Indonesia, Indonesia, for your introduction, Indonesia is one of the largest country in the Southeast Asia region, and we have a GDP about $1.1 trillion US, and hopefully in 2045 we are entering the developed countries. However, there is unequal economic development, including unequal in the infrastructure distribution. For example, in 2018, the unequal electricity distribution has happened in Indonesia, because we have a lot of island, and some island is, I mean, in total electricity ratio in Indonesia is about 98.3%, but some regions still have less than 70%. Okay, and let me talk about a little bit about the infrastructure financing in the budget. Actually, the infrastructure development is one of the priority for Indonesian development. and the spending of the government increased year by year. If you see here in 2009 only 76 trillion rupiah. In 2020 increased like 5 or 6 times, about 423 trillion rupiah. However, it's not enough. So the government is only expected to contribute about 37% of the total needs to build the infrastructure. And this because our limited fiscal space. We have a mandatory spending for education 20% in our budget and 5% for health. So it's very limited access, a limited space for the government to spend in this sector. And in revenue side also, we still have very, I can say, low tax to GDP ratio, and only 11.5% in 2017. Even this year is less than 9%, and this very below other countries. So to do that, that government tried to invite the private sector to, working together with the government to build the infrastructure in Indonesia. And this some literature, and basically that it said that the direct investment can affect the availability of infrastructure and tax incentive also have a positive impact on attracting FDI, including FDI on the infrastructure sector. Okay, so let me introduce the tax incentive related to the infrastructure in Indonesia. The tax incentive that provided to invite the investor, private sector to invest in infrastructure consists of two, is income tax and value-added tax. On income tax, we provide what we call tax holiday and tax allowance, and for value-added tax, we provide the VAT exemption. Let me go through a little bit about each of this incentive or this menu. So tax holiday, basically a tax holiday provides exemption for the corporate income tax for the pioneer industry. So we have, Indonesia have our own criteria for the pioneer industry, which is have a broad linkage and connection, generate value added and have externality, and also introduce a new technology, provide strategic value for national economy, and etc. So this is the criteria of the pioneer industry. Once you invest in this criteria, then we can provide the tax holiday. And this is the list. Actually, we already, Indonesia already providing the tax holidays from 2011, and we, improve the regulation. And the last regulation is in 2018. And I just want to show you that the economic infrastructure is one of the sector that can get the tax holiday. So this is the scheme. I will not explain one by one, but we provide, Indonesia now provide more, easy and more the service to give to the investor is easier compared to the previous one. And the result is in 2011, this only very small number of a company or investor use this tax holiday, and in 2018 the number is increased significantly. And in the right side, this is especially for the investor are from the economic infrastructure, which is quite big. 23 investor will invest about $2 billion US dollar. Yeah. And what I want to say is there is if changes in the regulation, and the main message for this regulation, changes in regulation is the simplicity and easier for the investor to get this tax holiday, and the service from the government. And the next incentive that can be used by the investor who want to invest in many area, including the tax, including the infrastructure, is we call it tax allowance. So this tax allowance is tax incentive for investment in certain sector and certain location. And the benefit, at least we provide 4 benefits for them. One is a reduction of taxable income, and then reduction, accelerate the depreciation, extended period of loss carry forward, and reduction in tax, withholding tax 10%, and for the dividend usually we tax 20%, but especially for this tax allowance 10%. There are some history also for this tax allowance. We also starting providing the tax allowance in 2011, and up to now still we are still provide.
Well,
yes.
You could just conclude, and then we have more time for discussion. We do have your presentation detail. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So this is the sector, and then the result, and same with the tax holiday. The government try to make more, trusty and verify, and very easier for the investor. And this is the VAT exemption, and VAT exemption is basically for the building, for apartment, housing, and dormitory. And this is also the results. And the conclusion is that Indonesia implement tax holiday, attract the direct investment, VAT, to attract investment on the household, low income household housing. And the utilization of tax holiday and tax allowance was limited in initial period, but there's simplicity and procedure and certain play on essential role in attracting investment. And then the implement of single service should be optimized. And we propose to put additional sector in the list. I think that's all. So let's have a discussion for the further.
Thank you. Thank you, Wawan. Very comprehensive and pinpointed. This is a very good lesson from ASEAN that we could certainly utilize. And I hope our member countries from CARAC region could just listen to you and take away some of the points you were raising in terms of Indonesian experience. So this is great. And for this paper, Wawan, we have the honor of having former Dean of ADBI, Professor Yoshino, who doesn't really need any further introduction. He's a well-known individual, a figure. And in fact, this particular activity that we were speaking right here was initiated with Dean Yoshino together. We started discussing about this activity last year in Almaty. Yes. So Dean Yoshino was highlighted. He's also one of the main editors of this book, along with a number of editors, myself, Dr. Nila, and my colleague Deldar, and other colleagues are involved. So Professor Yoshino, I would like to hand over the floor. Please respond to Wawan's paper.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very good presentation, especially focusing on Asia, South Asia. I have 2 major comments. First one is infrastructure investment would be very different after COVID-19. It was originally railways and roads are very important as a transport. However, after COVID-19, remote work from home may become very popular. Then transportation infrastructure might not be so important. However, digital infrastructure will become much more important. Internet and also large scale capacity of internet will be needed. And then how will you change those different kinds of infrastructure investment in not only South Asia, but also in CAREC regions? And secondly, these remote infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure, will help remote area. Indonesia has so many islands. Then this digital infrastructure can provide education. For example, top teacher can teach physics. Another top teacher can teach English. Then wherever the people are living in remote island, they can access to the best education in Indonesia. So I think a digital infrastructure would become much more important compared to traditional infrastructure. Secondly, as far as infrastructure is concerned, green energy, solar power, will be very important in remote island. It used to be we need some big wire from main island to remote island, but nowadays our solar power can be constructed in many, many regions. Then the cost of their electricity supply could be reduced much more compared to before. Last point is about tax incentives and tax holidays. Theoretically, tax incentive, tax holidays will bring good infrastructure investment, good companies into the region. That is the best scenario. However, worst scenario, tax exemption, then the collection of tax revenue will go down, and then transportation costs much more. Then that will create deficits to the budget of the country. So my proposal, which I will talk next week, is we should look at spillover tax revenues constructed by infrastructure investment, including digital infrastructure, how much it has increased tax revenues. Then you can return those increased tax revenues to corporations and so on. Then government will never lose money because increased tax revenue is already existing tax revenue rather than providing reduction of taxes. So I think tax incentive is good idea. However, worst case, the deficits will be created and then the scenario may not work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Yoshino, Professor Yoshino. Indeed, again, great input and feedback. I hope Wawan took note and incorporate as your input. I do really like this digitalization. Digital infrastructure is important. Yes, post-COVID-19, we're going to talk a lot about digital world. So with that said, I do have a question before Wawan, you would like to, maybe Wawan, you could just briefly, if you could take 1 or 2 minutes to respond to Professor Yoshino, then I start the floor for, open the floor for questions.
Yeah,
please.
thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Yoshino. It's my honor to have a comment from Professor Yoshino. Yeah, I do agree with Professor Yoshino for the digital infrastructure, and actually, Professor, in our list, we already also provide for the tax holiday and also for the tax allowance for this digital economy. So I think we already in line with your suggestion, and with I think that's make more confident for us that we choose the right sector. I mean, because, and also for the green energy, we also put the green energy, geothermal and extra wind power and extra is includes also in the list. So I think it's also follow your point. And yes, unfortunately, we already invest a lot of money to invest in the road and etc. before the pandemic. And yes, we face difficulty now. Now we're facing the difficulty, Professor, because no one moves. So, but let's wait until this pandemic is finishing, and we really hope that this road, this railway can be used normally.
Thank you, Wawan. I have a question. I hear my voice back. There's an echo. Wawan, maybe it's I mute you. And the question is from Omejan. Omejan, I think you have some background noise. If you could check, and then I give you the floor so you can raise your question.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's great to see all of you, and it's also an honor for me to ask a question after Dean Yoshino. And so what I'm interested in ex-ante analysis of the investment project, because the presenter, Wawan Sumanto, he explained a lot about tax incentives and how they're actually attracting the investors. But now in a post-pandemic world, it might be more interesting, as Dean Yoshino mentioned, the returns from the infrastructure. And I know the experience of Dean Yoshino when it was estimating it for different sectors. For Japan, we know that as time flows, some sectors have higher returns, some sectors have lower return. And in that sense, what is the process in Indonesia for ex-ante economic analysis of the infrastructure project. Like in Afghanistan, I know they have like 2 tracks. One is the fast track, second is like switch stage track. You look at NPV, IRRs, and how they're affecting. And because on the other hand, if you make too much analysis, it will be a bottleneck. On the other hand, you overspend and you have low returns from the infrastructure investment. So it's interesting how you manage that aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Midjan. Both Wawan, you would like to respond first, and then maybe Dean Yoshino could address the question too.
Yes, of course, we did the analysis before we invest in the infrastructure. And for your information, I'm talking before the pandemic. Right? Indonesia still very lack of the infrastructure capital, especially on road and railway. So without any sophisticated analysis, we just everybody understand that we need to invest more on infrastructure at that time. But unfortunately, there is a pandemic, and then we not lockdown, semi-lockdown the city. So the useness of this infrastructure is very low. I'm not sure how we will analyze this, because it's very extraordinary situation in this year.
Thank you, Wawan. Professor Yoshino, you would like to say something?
Yes, I have one comment. Indonesia decided to move capital from Jakarta to other city. However, if this work from home will become very popular, then congestion will be drastically reduced. And then you don't need any new road and so on. Only digital infrastructure will become very important. So I think COVID-19 will bring in many countries drastic change in the structure. So I think many infrastructure has to be rethought about it. Otherwise, we cannot cope with post-COVID-19 era. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Exactly, Dean Yoshino. Jakarta noise.
Yeah.
No traffic jam in Jakarta. Please.
Dean Yoshino, Professor Yoshino, indeed, you bring a lot to the table, and now I see a lot of us are provoked, and we would like to say, I see Professor Liu. Exactly. So this digitalization, digital foundation could really help us even reduce the stress on these dense cities. And I would like to give the floor to Professor Liu. You would like to say something? I see that you wanted to, please.
No, not really. I just thought the comment on COVID-19 and effect on urban traffic is ironically, is very relevant, and that's all. I don't want to say
Thank you,
hi to Professor Yoshino.
No problem, no problem. And Nicholas, given your experience, extensive experience as a practitioner in this area, would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you. 1 second, please.
Meanwhile, colleagues, you're welcome to raise your hand. We do have time. So one of our country presentation is not happening. Only one country presentation is happening. So we have time. Please raise your hand or voice your...
Mr. Moderator, this is Nicholas here. Yeah, I just wanted to add very quickly or comment on Dean Yoshino's mention on digitalization, getting back to what we discussed about regarding rural environments and less densely populated areas in the Central Asian context. Here, I think there is, yeah, 1 second. I think there is a huge reservoir of opportunity for sustainable growth that needs to be explored. And this brings different perspectives from traditional smart cities approaches, right, which have been built upon intensive IT to control water, to control mobility in cities. The next steps will be a little bit different. If we enter this only through an urban lens, I don't think this will be possible. I would say, and especially given the moment of development of Central Asian countries, especially Uzbekistan, which is the most populated one, it needs to be included into a Central Asian infrastructure approach, not just infrastructure about energy, etc., but infrastructure about IT and how this can connect to urban development. And here again, I think the question of standards and norms will be raised, meaning that probably more regional cooperation can also help move towards a competition of different norms and standards, whether it is through monitoring or space observation and etc. And this is really something that is important. This is why in my presentation in the paper, I referred to the quality infrastructure investment principles, which were pre-COVID, but because they were agreed at the level of the G20, meaning that in the G20, there is Japan and there is China and there is the Russian Federation and there is the United States and there is Europe, right? And there is Turkey, for example, for instance. And this could be sort of a common ground to think about future infrastructure systems without having to reinvent yet another way to converge on infrastructure and sustainability.
Great. And again, great input. Thank you, Nicholas. I'm sure other colleagues have. I see Professor David, maybe you have switched on your video. Do you want to add?
I'd only like to ask for 90 seconds to really support this entire agenda. I think that it began with former Dean Yoshino's comments, but we have to recognize the role of so-called fine energy infrastructure, meaning IT, in universal inclusive development. I mean, let's face it, the internet is now the encyclopedia of humanity, and it has the potential, as the former dean suggested, to deliver education with a level of quality and scope, I mean, inclusiveness, that we have never seen before. And we really have to incorporate that in all of our commitments to infrastructure. The human capacity potential of IT to be part of the build out in every direction across Asia is absolutely essential. It's the way, really, I would say, to take Asia's skill intensive model for development and catapult it into a more inclusive model for growth.
Thank you so much, Professor David. Indeed, we observed actually what digital infrastructure does. And in times like, for example, right now, this ongoing pandemic, countries who have a strong digital infrastructure, they're doing pretty okay. They're doing well compared to those they don't. So with that said, I would like to conclude this session and okay, we still have the floor open. Professor Yoshino, you could take this opportunity before you leave. Maybe add on a few more.
I think it's a great conference. I think digital infrastructure and the impact of COVID-19 on infrastructure also has to be discussed in this book, because this book will be published next year. So I think we have to think about how it will change the traditional way of thinking about infrastructure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Professor Yoshino, if you recall, we are privileged to have you because at the end of this workshop, the fourth day, you will be giving an overall feedback to each chapter. We would really appreciate if you just highlight this point that you raised here, and that would be great for all colleagues, chapter authors.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any other comments from the floor? Interestingly, in this webinar, we don't really have any question from attendees or participants. They're usually very active, but interestingly, we don't have any question from the floor. Any questions from country representatives? You could ask your questions in Russian. Yes, Dr. Nila.
I think, I don't know, maybe they don't know how to raise question. Raise hands. I think that's a problem. The second one, I want to say something about the editor. So the main editor for this book, this will be Didi Kim, Dr. Iskandar, and Professor Yoshino. That's while he's here, I explained, and then Professor Bajan Grewal. So, and then me and Ayub and the team will support, like connect board of editors for this book. So, yeah, this just I should mention that in the beginning.
Thank you, Dr. Neela. And still the floor is open because Muhammad Isa tried to reconnect. So if there's any other comment, I think this is the great opportunity right now just available. So we would really appreciate a comment from our scholars and experts. I really enjoy Nicholas's the important points. Nicholas, you could just get back to the point if you would like to expand some of the issues you raised. And now we do have the opportunity, please. Nicholas? Nicholas, can you hear us? If you're there, you could certainly take the floor and expand on some of the points you wanted to elaborate and we didn't have time for you. Okay, so.
Could we, let me check.
If there is some time, perhaps,
yes, please.
If I
please.
maybe I can help
please.
to
Dr. Neela, do you mind if you check with Muhammad Isa if he's not able to reconnect, or if Derek could help? Professor Liu, please.
Yeah, since you have some time, and if I may try to help you fill the time. I think about the COVID-19, it is of course a very important new emergency situation. Now, this thing is going to run for some time. The most likely period, most likely date for all this to end would be several, 2 or 3 years away at least. On the other hand, would it change the nature of the demand for urban infrastructure, of infrastructure in general? It might, but I don't think it's likely to reduce the scale of the need. It just means, you probably need a different kind of infrastructure. It's probably going to be less transport-based, more digital-based. But even so, maybe there is a difference between the East and West, so to speak. In China and Japan and Indonesia, and so, the lockdown does take any effect. And more or less everyone conforms to the rules. But not in the West, where the tolerance is much less. So there is social distancing is yes, but the social closeness is still there. The need for social closeness is still there, and much stronger in the West than in the East. Maybe this is a very, very, very rough kind of impressionistic characterization. But I think the scale is there. The scale of the need is there. It's just probably slightly changed the nature of the.
And Professor Liu, you are raising an important phenomena in the sense that if you look at the Eastern societies in terms of closeness, they're very close. They're very family oriented. And if you're just going to discuss Western societies, often people think they're individualistic. So, and then with the social distancing, we do have the problem more in Western societies, or some would say, and not in Eastern societies so much. But that said, I would like to go to Nicholas, since Nicholas is back. Nicholas, please. Because we have time, Nicholas, our colleague from Afghanistan is still struggling to connect.
Right. So I could have spoken even much longer for my presentation, right?
Exactly. That's why I felt guilty. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. May I just ask you to quickly recap your question in just 2 words?
It was just an open, because you were elaborating in some of the important points, and I cut you off, and I thought they were very valuable. You could just expand on any important issue you think needs to be discussed with CARA countries, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Isa. I just, if I have a minute, then I would like to get back to Professor Liu's very initial comments after the presentation and regarding the growth model linked with urbanization and industrialization and transformation. this is quite important also, that he referred to the work that he carried out back with the World Bank back in 2009, right? I think 10 years afterwards, most of this kind of very simple approach remains valid, that urbanization comes as part of a more comprehensive set of policies to foster growth, right? There is something that is a game changer, and it clearly is digitalization. If you look, and I had this, but any diagram about the level of exchange of information across countries and regions in the last 10 years, it has exponentially grown, right? And it will grow, it will continue to grow exponentially through the 5G and other systems, but also through physical infrastructures like marine cables and others. And in the Central Asian region, as part of the Belt and Road initiatives, but also partnership with the European Union and other, I would say, multilateral or bilateral or semi-multilateral initiatives, we can see this will happen. This will happen, right? It's not a question of if, it's a question of how and when. And then we would need to consider very seriously how social infrastructure can meet the level of development that will be provided by new physical and IT and digital connection infrastructures. And this is one point, those social change, social transformations. And the second one, the second short remark here is, of course, urbanization as such is one aspect of growth. And in the Central Asian context, what makes the situation, I would say, rather unique and even quite different than other regions, such as in Sub-Saharan Africa, is that we are in Asia. We are so close to China. We're so close. We're not far from other Southeast Asian countries. We're not far from the Russian Federation. We're not far from Turkey, which are very active in different segments of mobility and other, I would say, sectors and sectoral approaches to urban transformation.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you. Again, you brought some really important input, but now we have Muhammad Isa back from Afghanistan. If we should give him the floor.
That's more important. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we're looking forward to reading your revised chapter and also your presentation. Have you given your pre-recorded presentation, Nicholas?
You don't even need to ask twice. No, not yet, because I need to figure out how I can register that properly.
So you gave that to us, so we uploaded to our colleagues. So
yeah,
all right. So you just detailed that you would like in your pre-recorded presentation. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now,
Thank you.
You're coming with a different name, Mir Ashraf, I believe. Please, the floor is yours. If you're there, please open your mic.
Derek, have you escalated Mir Ashraf Ahmadi as a panelist?
Yes.
Okay, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I think he's still there. So let me try to promote him to the panelist. Okay, Nicholas, sorry, and again, we just cut you off. For the second session, the first session was Deputy Dean Kim, and the second session as well. And the colleagues, you did a fantastic and an amazing job in having interactive session with important inputs. And now the floor is back to you, Dr. Nela. You may conclude the webinar of the day. Till tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the technical error last time. So we now reach the end of our first day, and I think I have a lot of notes today, and we hear a lot from our experts. And I think it's not only me have a lot of information about infrastructure, but I think you also. So we hear 5 presentations from 5 papers today, and if you want to know more about this paper, the idea, we have the full video in the Karek Institute platform. I believe my colleague Ayub and Derek already sent the link to you all. So, and then with that, we conclude our session today. And I would like to remind you that we will start like this time tomorrow. And we have our session 3 and session 4. And we have 4 papers to be presented tomorrow. And then 3 country presentation. And we have Dean Sonobe keynote remarks in the beginning tomorrow. With that, thank you very much, everyone. Ayub, Wawa, Nicholas, I mean the one that's still here. Thank you very much, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Wawan.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
Nicholas,
Thank
thank you very much.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you
All right,
for
Muhammad Seb, thank you. Thank you, all
Mahdi.
colleagues. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry for
See you again
inconvenience.
tomorrow.
No problem, no problem.
See you tomorrow.
Yes.
See you.
Yes,
Tomorrow.
yes.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.